Okay. I'd like to call to order the Fort Ord Reuse Authority regular meeting for Friday, February 9th, 2018. Welcome, everyone. The next item is Pledge of Allegiance. If Mayor Dallas would lead us. Okay, we'll move on to acknowledgments, announcements, and correspondence. Mr. Hulamart.
Yes, I think I might have the wrong date on this. Bill, correct me. Are there bus tours this weekend for Fort Ord? Last weekend on the 3rd? Okay. Couple.
Yeah.
I have multiple different agendas here in my package. Chair, I'd like to hold the announcements and correspondence till later.
Okay. We'll move on to closed session. Authority Counsel, would you read us into closed session, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members of the board and public, we have 3 items on for closed session today. First item is 4A, conference with Legal Counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9D2, one matter of significant exposure to litigation where the claimant is Marina Community Partners. Second item, 4B, conference with Legal Counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A, Keep Fort Ord Wild versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority. And 4C, Public Employment, Government Code Section 54959.7B, Executive Officer Evaluation.
Very good, thank you. Put it back. Okay. Okay. Authority Counsel, will you read us out of closed session, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and members of the board and public. The board met in closed session, heard on item 4A concerning Marina Community Partners' significant exposure to litigation. The board heard from counsel, considered its options, and there's nothing to report out on that matter. 4B, Keep Fort Ord Wild versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority. Counsel also heard from, or the board also heard from counsel, and there's nothing to report out on that matter. And item 4C, Public Employment, executive officer evaluation. Nothing to report.
Okay, thank you. We'll go back to acknowledgements, announcements, and correspondence. Mr. Hulamart.
Yes, Chair, I just have three brief announcements. The first one is many of you have been contacted by the Economic Development Office at the Fort Ord Reuse Authority about the 2018 job survey. The early part of what we're getting back is telling us that we are definitely increasing in job growth and in economic development on the former Fort Ord, but we will be asking assistance on collecting the data. All of that should be reported by the March meeting, although it may wind up taking until April, but most likely in March we'll be reporting that. The second item is on February 16th, next Friday, we are going to be conducting a special set of training related to compliance with land use covenants that are tied with our property transfers on Fort Ord, specifically as it pertains to munitions and explosives. I know Monterey Peninsula College and California State University Monterey Bay, the City of Seaside, the county, City of Delray Oak, City of Monterey are all participating. We will have representatives from US EPA, DTSC, California Department of Toxic Substances Control, the U.S. Army, and others. And then finally, on an important positive note, today we were able to record the water deed transfer that allows water to be transferred from the United States Army to the city of Marina for the Veterans Transition Center housing project. And I know the city of Marina is happy to hear that. That's a very good news item for our whole community.
Okay, thank you. The next item is a roll call.
Supervisor Parker, Supervisor Phillips, Supervisor Adams, Mayor Edelin, Councilmember O'Connell, Councilmember Morton, Councilmember Hoffa, Mayor Rubio,
Here.
Councilmember Alexander, Mayor Carbone, Mayor Gunter, Councilmember Garfield, Mayor Dallas, Kathleen Lee, Nicole Hollingsworth, Erica Parker, Todd Muck, Dr. Diffenbach, Steve Matarazzo, Dr. Lawrence Samuels, Colonel Brown, Bill Collins, Dr. Tribely, Lisa Reinheimer, and Jan Schreimer. You have a quorum.
Very good, thank you. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, which consists of approved January 12th, 2018 meeting minutes, Administrative Committee minutes, I imagine, Veterans Issues Advisory Committee, Water Wastewater Oversight Committee update, adopt workers' compensation resolution for governing body member and or volunteer workers' compensation coverage, and public correspondence to the board. Is there anybody on the board that would like to pull anything for further consideration? Yes, ma'am.
I just would like to ask a question with regard to 7E about the workers' comp. I would like to ask a question with regard to 7E about the volunteer coverage of workers' comp.
Okay.
I wanted to, if I may.
Yes.
I wanted to know, have we provided this coverage in the past? Is this an addition to our workers' comp coverage that you're expanding it?
We have not provided it in the past. Sherry, do you want to add a note?
We have not provided in the past, as the executive officer said. This is a new program that's being offered by the Special Districts Association, and it's a recommendation that we enter into it. Given the overall cost, it seems like a prudent business decision from the staff's
It's a nominal cost, but I was just trying to figure out why, for the first time, that if a director was injured, that a director has the ability to claim workers' comp. And so thank you for answering that. And then, of course, I want to take that information back to my jurisdiction to see if our workers' comp would have a similar type program.
I think that the city manager in Marina mentioned to us that he'd been looking at the same and had some questions about cost. Turned out that this is
$200.
Relatively inexpensive.
Yeah, $550.
Right.
Okay. Is there any
Thank
other?
you for answering my question.
Sure. Does any other director have questions or want to pull anything for further consideration? Anybody from the public? Any public comment on the consent agenda? Okay, I'll bring it back. There's a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is item business, item 8A, 2018 election of board officers. Michael.
Yes, Chair, there you have a board report in front of you. Each year, and usually in the January meeting, but because of a delay, this has been pushed to February. The board elects officers, in this particular case, to serve for 11 months through next January. Normally it's for a year. There is a chair, first vice chair, a past chair to serve on the committee, an ex officio member to serve as a non-voting member, and 2 FORA board members to serve as members at large. And so those are all explicitly noted in the board report. The nominating committee has met twice, once without all the members and once with all the members. I believe that their recommendation is included in the board packet and the memorandum on page 19 that specifies the nominating committee's recommendation. That would be Seaside Mayor Ralph Rubio as chair, Monterey County Supervisor Jane Parker as vice chair, past chair, Marina Mayor Pro Tem Frank O'Connell. I believe you're no longer Pro Tem, so it should be Marina Council Member Frank O'Connell, Member at Large Delray Oaks Mayor Jerry Edelin, Member at Large Salinas Mayor Joe Gunter, and ex officio member Eduardo Ochoa. That is essentially the same executive committee as this year, and over time that has been consistently how the board has handled its executive committee. However, we have had other nominations in the past. The process that we would use is to confirm that this is the nominating committee's nomination. If the nominating committee concurs, we would open if there's any objection by the nominating committee members. Seeing none, then the board has the...
Did you say objections from the nominating committee or on the item?
From the nominating committee.
I'm not on the nominating committee.
Right. Therefore, the board may elect to do this in several different ways. There could be a motion to accept the nominating committee's recommendation. If it's second and carries with majority support, then that can be made in whole or in part. That's what it says here under number 2. If there isn't a summary nomination, or if the summary nomination fails to receive a majority approval, then I will request nominations from other board members. In the order of any outstanding positions not filled, then she'll be chair, vice chair, and so forth. So if at this point I would suggest, Chair, that you seek to see if there is a motion to accept the nominating committee's slate recommendation.
We'll entertain a motion to that effect.
Second.
There's a motion and a second
And there will be time for comment.
right now.
So thank you very much for allowing me just to say a couple of words. I simply want to point out, I'm not asking for a change, but I simply want to point out that 46% of the composition of the board are women, and only 16% of the composition of the executive committee is female. So I simply want to make that comment, and there you have it.
Thank you. Yes.
I just have a process question because I wanted to propose an idea for the future, but I think voting on the executive committee is a separate thing. But I just wanted to make sure that after we have that vote, I can make a comment proposing a way to deal with nominating and the process going forward. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so my comment last year when we were doing this same exercise, Director Hoffa actually asked that how we do the process would come back for a discussion. It's a year later, we're doing it the same way. And part of that discussion was for the at-large members, because the chair to vice chair to past chair is pretty, you don't really have a lot of choice about those designations. But the at-large positions being more addressed and circulated through the totality of the 13 voting members. So I get we're in February. I get that this is where we are, but I think we've now gone a year and haven't addressed that.
I would suggest to the board and to the executive officer that we agendize that item at our next meeting. We'll take it up at the executive board and then forward it to the full board. Okay. All right. So there's a motion and a second. Is there any public comment? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Excuse me, Chair. For the future, this is Jan speaking. Am I, as a non-voting member, considered a member of the public for getting an opportunity to speak, or as a board member?
As a board member.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I'll try to. Well, what's the best signal for you? To get your attention, what is the best signal for you?
Just raise your hand so I can see it.
Okay.
Because I try to look around, and
Yeah.
if I don't see you, you can say something.
Thank you.
I try to get everybody. Okay. Next item is transition planning update. Michael?
Yes, Chair. As you know, we have been engaged in transition planning for about 2 years. We've had 2 different transition task forces that have been impaneled and have completed their work and brought the reports back to the board. At the January meeting, board member Manning specified that he wanted the board to consider making some adjustments to what they had determined last fall. The board members agreed with Senator Manning to move ahead with essentially a side-by-side approach, analyzing extending FORA with some potential modifications on one side. On the other side, looking at what he called a devolution or dissolution or a offloading of FORA's obligations and responsibilities to the individual jurisdictions and what that meant on both sides. So the board directed staff to move ahead on that basis. The last meeting, we have since that time structured some support mechanisms and reporting on each of the categories, and so in a moment Sherry Damon will take you through that. But we also have asked the chair to impanel a new transition advisory / ad hoc committee, or the TAC, which I think their first meeting was scheduled for the 21st. I think we're going to have to move that because I think there's some key people we want to make sure make that. But we will be having that meeting very soon, and Sherry will take you through this update to further detail these items.
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the board, members of the public. My name's Sherry Damon. I'm the Prevailing Wage Risk Coordinator for FORA and the face of transition, I guess. Today we're going to be, there we go, talking about 3 items, just providing an update with what's happened since January. The ad hoc committee, the charge, and the committee members. The update to the schedule. The summary charts for the administrative contracts and environmental services contracts, and then what's new in terms of SB 50 and how that affects transition and future property transfers, because it will affect the transition. And I want to apologize, before I get there. Whoa. I want to apologize to the board and members of the public in advance. I received phone calls about a couple of typographical clerical errors, so I wanted to provide some clarification and correction to those. On page 24, on the summary chart, there's the word water in the middle of the page. That is not correct. It should be administration. And it's pretty clear that the administrative contracts is what was intended by that. It's just the use of a template to provide consistency. That word got left in. So I apologize for that. On page 26, attachment B, exhibit 1A, should actually be attachment C. There's no change to the information. It's just behind the wrong packet. It really relates more to the environmental services part of the information that was provided. And finally, on page 32, the word water should be updated with the word environmental services contract. And again, I wanted to thank those who brought those issues to my attention. So moving on to the task transition ad hoc committee charge. There's a whole bunch of words here. I'm not going to reiterate those. They're in your packet. They're online and available for public review. There's essentially two charges. I think Michael's already outlined those. One, reviewing the side-by-side comparison, what it looks like devolving to the various jurisdictions. And two, reviewing and discussing modifications to the FORA Act. Those are your two main charges in a shorthand way, describing them. Committee members are the same committee members as participated in the transition task force during the last round. So you have the transition ad hoc committee chair is Andre Lewis. You have council member Hoffa, council member Morton, Mayor Edelin, Mayor Rubio, supervisor and chair Adams, council member Garfield, and director Debbie Hale. Whoa. Hair trigger there. Your schedule has been modified slightly, which is why we're here today. We are sticking with the schedule that we put forward to the board in January to complete the summary charts for the entire board's consumption and public consumption as soon as possible with the information that we have out. The big change here is we've added items for the transition ad hoc committee and the side-by-side comparison. The rest of the timeline stays pretty much the same. Coming to the board with a final transition plan in the September-October timeframe, or August, September, somewhere in there, early fall. So here we have a summary chart for the administrative contracts, and I apologize for the small type here. This information is also in your board packet and will be rolled out to the transition ad hoc committee as we move forward through the process. To remember, for everybody's recollection, these are draft documents. As we move forward through the process, they'll be refined, they may be revised, the designations may change, some of the notes may even change as we get more information and start refining this a lot more. The two biggest liabilities here for your administration are CalPERS liability. FORA has done a good job of setting aside some funds to address that liability. However, we don't know until we actually provide the notice and get the annuity results from CalPERS what that actually will be. And the second biggest administrative liability is the indemnification agreement, or will be the indemnification agreement coming forward from LAFCO for the transition plan process. So this board can expect to see some next year fiscal year budget items related to the LAFCO and the transition planning process, application fees, indemnification set-asides, environmental review fees coming down the pike, just as a heads up. Next summary chart relates to your environmental services. Very complicated environmental services on how we clean up the base. Lots of overlapping agreements between regulatory agencies like the Department of Toxic Substance Control, or EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, agreements between the Army and FORA, FORA and jurisdictions, FORA, jurisdictions, and DTSC. So trying to capture the essence of all the agreements related to environmental services so that we don't have things that fall through the cracks in the transition process as we hand things over and obligations, pledges, liabilities, assets start to get refined. We want to make sure we're catching everything. So out there for consumption. There's some ongoing requirements as well as we move forward in the transition planning process, listing and delisting of properties for Superfund site registration, for example, things like that. And finally, getting to what's new, SB 50. SB 50 is a law that was, it's a bill that was signed into law October 6th, 2017. And essentially it makes two big, broad, sweeping changes. One, it says all lands that transfer as of January 1, 2018 that transfer from the federal government to any entity, there's no exception for public entities, has to be offered first to the State Lands Commission, and they need to issue a certificate of compliance to say that, yes, indeed, you've made the offer to us and we agree that this transfer can go forward. And then it also it imposes and establishes penalties and fines if you try to go and record documents without having that certificate of compliance. It's a big issue, and the reason it affects transition and us today is we still have EDC lands that have not transferred from the federal government, and you just heard from your executive officer, from Michael, earlier about the Veterans Transition Center water deed that went to the city of Marina. That transfer, the recording, was affected by this legislation, and the only reason it was able to be recorded is we were able to obtain a writing from the State Lands Commission attorney saying, for that one recording, you're okay. But there was no blanket exemption for the rest of the 225 plus or minus acres that still have to transfer. So those transfers affect MST, UC the County of Monterey, the City of Seaside, and the City of Monterey. All of those entities still have lands to be transferred. So that's out there. Also, the definition under the new legislation has a very expansive definition of what constitutes lands. And that definition includes rights of way, easements, water deeds, things like that. So if you are trying to put a wastewater line across federal piece of property, that easement would need to go right now to the State Lands Commission to get an exemption until they promulgate new regulations that either give us a blanket exemption or define it as a routine recording. We could be barred from recording those. So just keep that in mind. Also, other impacts are rights of first refusal under our EDC, and any conversion of PBCs to EDC, so public benefit conveyances that maybe are no longer necessary. The way it works now, those are relinquished back into the economic development conveyance, and then they are reconveyed out through the economic development conveyance documents. And that concludes my report. If you have any questions, I'm available.
Any questions for Ms. Damon?
Actually, mine is maybe a question for Nicole Hollingsworth. I had a clarifying question about the Kutak Rock letter that's in our packet. It seems to be saying or creating the impression that only FORA can interact with the federal government on ESCA related matters, and I don't believe that's the case. In the past, when we've talked about post-FORA realities, we've talked about JPAs being a possible point of contact, or the county taking the lead, or another entity taking the lead. And I understand staff may think that because of Senator Monning's comments, which is why it's a clarifying thing for Nicole Hollingsworth if she wants to speak to it, but that staff may think that because of Senator Monning's message about the sort of successor JPA idea, that no JPAs are allowed to be discussed or formed. And so I think when we've talked about ESCA, when we've talked about habitat management, JPAs were the vehicle that we envisioned, and I would expect that at some point FORA will expire, whether it's sooner or later, and that we can and should use limited authority JPAs to take on the tasks that will go on into the future indefinitely. So, and I would expect that FORA staff would assist and lay the groundwork for the formation of those JPAs as appropriate. So, I don't know, Nicole, if you want to speak, or maybe Sherry, you can speak
I don't
to
know
it.
if I need to respond to that. I mean, staff is doing what staff believed was the direction. And as I said, these are draft documents. I don't want to get too far ahead of the transition ad hoc committee. And in my discussions, my thought process in terms of transition on December 31st, 2018, we have to, as a board, submit a transition plan. And if a JPA is formed by the jurisdictions that agree to participate in that JPA, either by that time or shortly thereafter, definitely by the time LAFCO takes action. That I think could absolutely be an option that every single jurisdiction that has some liability to perform an obligation can do or take. And if the board wants to direct staff to help in the preparation of those documents, of course, staff will do whatever we're directed to do in that. And I'll just tell you that in my discussions on this issue, there will be an executive summary with the transition plan that comes forward as final. And it will say something along those lines that, as a note where you have multiple agencies listed there, that those agencies that have committed to participating, made commitments to participate through the JPA process, then the JPA would be designated as the successor. Those entities that do not participate would have continuing responsibility as a successor entity. So you might have that kind of a situation with multiple entities.
Yes, thank you, Sherry. With regard to that ESCA, that was one of the first 2016 task force was talking about the feasibility, which we haven't explored or it's not here, of FORA, the JPA, continuing with the sole purpose of the ESCA obligations. And so last board meeting, I would like to, I know I'm going to be at that transition task force, but that certainly would be one of the things that I think the task force would consider is not that you need a new one, but maybe that you're limiting the scope of the existing JPA. And when we approved the 6.8 million, give me the number.
6.8.
6.8.
Thank you, 6.8 million, which came before us last month. That was one of the things that I asked about, was that funding included the administrative cost, that it's a funding mechanism that if FORA, in its limited focus, would that be the money to run it, the ESCA operations, or if another entity such as the county took responsibility, would they have the funding to cover the cost of Mr. Cook or whoever might still work? So I think those are options that I look forward to having included in this discussion. I did have some question with regard to your subject matter summaries. And your font is so small.
I'm sorry.
Even in here. But what I didn't see, and I knew it was a typo if you emailed that correction, but where is the summary with regard to existing contracts affecting water? Is that a summary that's going to come to us in the transition task force? It's just not prepared yet?
It actually came to you last month. In the water, wastewater, it was water and wastewater were reported last month as the first couple of chapters in the transition plan. But I will bring forward, it's my intent to bring forward everything that we have currently.
Okay, so that will also be an additional summary.
Yes, so right now the transition plan, the idea is every single subject matter area has a summary chart and a list of contracts that go hand in hand with those subject matter areas. And then there will be a miscellaneous other and an executive summary tying everything together for it. So next month is transportation and habitat.
So the other one that I don't see here is a summary of existing obligations. And one of those being the 44 million owed to Marina Community Partners. In the last two transition task force, I know we don't owe 44 million. I'm just referencing the contract. Please don't misunderstand that I think we owe them 44 million. But it's an executory contract, meaning we have to perform it going forward, and it has never been discussed in the last two transitions. And that and any other like executory contract that we still need to perform, they need to be on a summary page.
Yes.
Or their own individual summary page. So I would be looking for that. And I know you're on a tight time frame, and that's why you have, like, February, March, we're going to look at these summaries, and that's why I'm raising these issues here, that everybody's having the opportunity to weigh in on what other summaries their jurisdiction would find most important. So those are my questions, not that they needed to be answered, but we're looking forward to that discussion. I had one last question. Why would state lands want anything with munitions issues? I mean, is it really other than a pro forma administrative leap, or are they going to take it and take responsibility, and then my city could buy it back later?
There's a, you know,
I think that's what I would do.
I more than anything else, I think the board should take note that there is that things that happen on a national level affect us at a local level. The state of California, I think, was intending to make sure that we didn't wind up in a circumstance, as was announced and intended by this administration, to potentially put on the market national monument properties. The idea behind SB 50 was to have a barrier that would prevent that from occurring. So the intent here was one that was, in their minds, an honorable one. Their application turned out to be overbroad and reached into the pockets of every base realignment and closure action or existing military interaction with an adjacent community. Now, I'm saying all this because if you were to ask Colonel Brown about this, you might get a response that might be slightly more elevated, because it impacts his administration of properties throughout the state, because he does more than just this area. But the idea of doing this was to put a barrier to public properties winding up on the open market. As of right now, State Lands Commission does not anticipate having regulations available for quite a while. The earliest I anticipate seeing those will be the end of this year and probably into next year. And my colleagues around the rest of the state, I have 14 emails from this week of the complaints about the barriers this is putting to both recovery programs and community military interaction. And the folks in Office of Economic Adjustment, which are now in a brand new agency called ANS, Sustainment, have also said that this is a national problem, that not just California, but other states. And so sometimes for a good reason, you have a problem. So you always have to watch what the politics are nationally, because they can affect you locally.
Sure.
Thank you. And looking at it from a water lens, the state's Groundwater Sustainability Act does not apply, or I could say federal lands are exempt. And so it's cause for me to wonder. But also I wanted to mention, just before the meeting, I also mentioned it to staff, on the bottom of page 28, something that caught my eye through the water lens. I want to read it for the record, because I just want to sort of put it in a parking lot, if you don't mind me saying that. Like, I don't want to actually take it outside, but just set it aside for thought. Importantly, the EDC agreement provides that should the Army determine that additional water rights are access to the needs of the Army, FORA shall have the first right of refusal to any such transfer rights. Now, that doesn't sound like an easement to me. That sounds like water rights. Absent such central allocation of water rights in support of the community reuse plan, it is unlikely that the Army would transfer such water rights to the community. Now, I just want to say my understanding as a board member is the Marina Coast has these water rights. But that's why I say let's put it in the parking lot and let staff determine if, how this applies in this particular situation. I don't want it to be...
We'd be happy to share with you the specific language on page 13 of the EDC agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, we'll take it out to the public. Any questions or comments from the public?
Yes, George Riley. I want to suggest that there's been a mischaracterization of the side-by-side comparison. I was here last time when Senator Monty presented explained his law. And it seemed to me that he presented the law in the context of the spin-off of services is an absolute requirement, not spin-off, but the analysis of spin-off, be an absolute requirement before you go forward. I looked at that as an isolated, very specific charge to the FORA board But the way it's been presented, it's a comparison of the spin-off according to the law compared to a potential continuation of those services under FORA. I just think the characterization puts the two like in a comparison category, and I don't think that's what the law says, and I don't think that's what Senator Monning intended. I think he intended very specifically that FORA needs to address the issue of spinoff without considering other options. If it's complicated, if it becomes problematic, if there are stumbling blocks or barriers in that, then you consider alternatives. But you do not consider the spinoff as a comparison to not spinning it off. You analyze the conspiracy. Excuse me, the comparison very specifically on its own merits.
Hi, Mike DeLappo with Landwatch. I think George hit the nail on the head. When Senator Monning came here, he didn't request that you take a look at dissolution and the idea of the alternative of delegating responsibilities. He said it was the law. And I think those of us who attended this were quite startled that after 4 years since the last sunset bill that this hadn't been addressed, 2 years since the transition task force had been in operation, it hadn't been addressed. So it was rather startling that the senator had to come here and point out what the law requires. A reminder, the original closure of FORA was in 2014. It was extended at great political cost to 2020. I think believing that it's going to get extended again is a pipe dream. And I would really encourage you to take to heart what the law requires that Senator Monning pointed out. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Good afternoon, David Spar, staff for County of Monterey. Just have a clarification question on the certificate of compliance. Is that initiated by the Army or initiated by FORA?
I'll take a stab at that. I'm not sure there's a process.
We'll answer questions after
Sorry.
all the public comment is over.
Thank you.
My name is Frank Pierce, and I'd like to make a comment regarding the fact of how many women there are on the committees, because I think it's important to understand that for tens of thousands of years living in caves, men always had to get out with the point of the spear, and women had to manage everything. And that's why they have the multitasking management skills that they can produce so that the men have a point to go to. So I would suggest that you consider in your future to enjoy the power that the women bring to your organization.
Good afternoon. My name is Jason Campbell. I'm a Seaside Council member and also a second alternate on this board. I'd like to thank Mr. Hulamard for explaining the intent of SB 50, clarifying that, because I was going to address that and wonder what real impact it has on FORA and the actual jurisdictions, because it seems to me it would be easier if FORA wasn't. It's just another layer, so if FORA was out of the way, those lands could be transferred more directly to the jurisdictions. I didn't know how much FORA was aware of this bill coming through, but it sounds like the intentions were for good reason. Good reason. I applaud board member Jan Schreiner for mentioning the water. I mean, if there's excess water that the Army has, I mean, if there's excess water, you don't have to be here long to know there really is no such thing as excess water on the peninsula. And I believe that stemmed from the DC attorney's letter, who also claimed that the Army would prefer to work with one entity on the munitions cleanup, which, as Council Board Member Morton mentioned, ESCA is a perfectly good entity which could be managed by a JPA. But I do have to say, I have to reiterate the point that the first obligation of this board is to come up with a transition plan, the best transition plan you can. That's number one. And there's just no question. It's in the law. That's what you need to do. Someday, FORA is going to go away, and there needs to be a transition plan. We see a date in the future. I know some people want to postpone it, but we need that transition plan. Once you have the best transition plan, then you, as I heard, Senator Monning was open to seeing a comparison, a side-by-side comparison. But don't get distracted by that comparison. We need the transition plan. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. And we'll, any other closing comments? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say that I did, while it wasn't mentioned in the, because I don't think we were officially a part of the committee, Senator Monning's office, but I did sit in on the Transition Task Force meetings for the past 2 years, and I look forward to sitting in on the Transition Task Force meetings for the past next year. And Senator Monning has made this a priority, so he will also participate as available.
Thank you, and you are definitely welcome. Any other comments? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Attachment A, the Transition Task Force. I would agree with the speakers that indicated that when Senator Monning came to us and he was asking for a transition plan, which was transitioning the responsibilities to agencies, plural, he pointed that out, meaning the jurisdictions. He used TAMSI as an example. And he did not direct us to do a compare and contrast. And I have a problem with the Transition Ad Hoc Committee saying the analysis will contrast FORA Act continuation, including potential modifications, with FORA Act sunset and assignment of liabilities, obligation, resources to the agencies. The task is to develop that transition plan of assignment to of the liabilities and obligations to the other successor agencies. We've already looked at what the two transition task force, what it would look like if FORA continued. We've already looked at that. If you want to bring that forward in the discussion at the board level about which do you want to do, which is better, that's appropriate. But I think the task force, the task is to create that transition plan as defined by the statute. And I think we've lost focus when we're talking about the scope of the work being number one, modifications to the existing FORA Act. That's what you have here in this description as what your task force is going to do, rather than the transition plan that's required by the law. And I think it's misfocused. So I certainly intend to participate on the Transition Task Force. I think we've all been told what's missing for Senator Monning to do anything if we needed him to do something, and I think we need to stay on focus.
Before we move on, Mr. Spar had a question from public comment. Could you address that, please?
Yes, Chair. Mr. Spar's comment was who initiates the request for a certificate of compliance, and it's not clear exactly who initiates that, but it would normally be, I believe, the receiving party, the receiving entity who's receiving land from the federal government would need to make sure that State Lands Commission is aware of the proposed transaction and that the State Lands Commission is offered a first right to those lands first. The state lands would then have a process, not sure exactly what that is. Could be months before we know what that process is. They would issue a certificate of compliance. So most likely the receiving party initiates that. But there might be other solutions as well. There might be a blanket certificate of compliance as a possible solution to this issue affecting economic development conveyances. It may be that the State Lands Commission writes into their regulations that those are routine transactions and they issue a blanket certificate of compliance. But we don't know that yet.
I think I just want to add, Chair, on this question, a relatively simple point. The United States Army does not care whether we record any of their property transfers. It's the obligation and responsibility of the receiving party to perform the recordation. which is why we hesitated to record the water deed, because there's a $5,000 penalty for anybody attempting to record without getting State Lands Commission approval. I didn't want to pay that. But so it is not the Army that would do it, it would be the receiving party. And that's pretty clear. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but not to say anything bad about the Army. Army says if we sign the document, it's yours. Whether you record it or not is up to you.
Yeah, for example, the Veterans Transition Center, it's taken 18 months for that 3 to 5 credit water transaction to go through. This is just another layer of bureaucracy which will add to the process of another 6 months to a year, depending on how long it takes to state to go through their process.
Any other? Yes, ma'am.
So sorry, going back to the transition task force again. I know that we are planning to have a consultant who will work with us as a member of the task force to help present an unbiased and a good comparison. Is there what's the process? Where are we standing now with that? So I know we've got some meetings scheduled, and where do we stand with that, please?
We've brought a consultant on board, and we'll be there to meet with the committee as soon as we schedule it.
And so has there been a scope of work already approved? And can you tell me who the person is that's coming on board?
It's Economic Planning Systems, EPS, David Zender and Ellen Martin. And it's been a very broad scope because it's virtually impossible to define exactly what the transition ad hoc committee might be or staff's needs for economic analysis moving forward. So it's framed right now as a short-term on-call services contract under $25,000, and we anticipate that it will be amended as the need for those services is refined and more able to be scoped more specifically.
And in order to make sure that the task force has the services needs, we hope that the task force will help to define what that scope is going to be. So I think we're in pretty good shape in that regard.
So I have a question on EPS. Sherry, what other contracts has EPS performed for FORA?
EPS currently performs our capital improvement program, so they are involved intimately in the forecasting and in the planning process for the capital improvement program, updating the information, numbers, financial projections. They do quite a bit of work in that arena.
And they did our reassessment report at a very high contract price, and they were involved in the base reuse plan, and they've done work for this organization for 26 years, correct?
As have some others, but yes, they have been providing a good deal of service to the agency over the years.
So my question is to answer to us as directors is, why was this entity selected without input from jurisdictions or boards who are looking for an independent, not just somebody that has had the perspective of FORA's interest for the last 26 years, that we're asking that somebody independently look at this and make the analysis that all of us can rely on without a conflict of interest. How did these people, this entity, not that they're a bad entity, how did they get chosen, and why wasn't the committee consulted or the full board?
Michael, do you want to take that?
No, I'm not deferring to anyone. Staff recommended that we would move ahead with an entity that could move quickly, that had the availability, that had the knowledge, that had the experience. They've not been working for us for 26 years. I think it's closer to a dozen. They were a subcontractor on the reassessment process. They weren't the primary. I think they have unique knowledge about our capital improvement program, the tax structure, the jurisdictions. They can provide, I think, and they are they're an objective, impartial entity. I would challenge that you want someone that understands and has the knowledge so that you aren't spending the time and the money to train someone to get ready to do the work. So there's a responsiveness that I think that they have in this case, and I believe they are an appropriate entity to provide the task force, the ad hoc committee, with the needs that they are going to demand.
Any other questions or comments on this item? Okay, we'll deem it received.
Before we move to the next item, I wonder if our videographer and sound and archivist can let us know. There seems to be a lot of buzzing and interference, and can you tell us what we might be able to do to decrease that? Thank you. I just wondered if there was something we could do to help, but it sounds like thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item 8C, Eastside Parkway goals and objectives. Michael.
Yes, Chair, this is a minor item on the board's agenda today. I think this is, I think we all understand that there's a significant amount of discussion that's gone on regarding this issue. I know the board members have reported to me that they've, while some of the people are so excited about this, many of them sent you several emails about this item. There was at least 125 or 150 different ones that you've received. So the board members know that the community is very interested in the discussion about Eastside Parkway goals and objectives. It's a process that's been ongoing. We received a number of different requests during the week, including requests for public records from back in the early 1990s, where Eastside Parkway as a different roadway name was included in the Regional Community Task Force report, to the work that was done between TAMC in the 1990s and 1996, and then reviewed by this board and adopted as part of the base reuse plan. Then studied again in 2005, studied again in 2010. It became the priority of this board. Folks who were on this board at that time felt it was important as a priority to complete. In other words, this part of the network at the former Fort Ord, and we continue to contest that this network is a mitigation for the impacts of what happens in the region as well as on Fort Ord. It's an ongoing process. It's intended to begin today and in the last couple of months with setting goals and objectives rather than routes or specifics, but rather to follow what the Monterey Superior Court has asked us to do, which is to undertake a process that offers public involvement in a robust fashion and not be pre-decisional. We are committed to a ground-up process that we have involved the board in this initial stage, and boards aren't always involved, in fact rarely, at the goals and objectives stage, but we are asking the board to render review on this important part of setting the stage for how to address this question of traffic mitigation and the network on Fort Ord. In this early stage, I want to reiterate that no routes have been assumed. We continue to learn as we get more information from the public, as we get more information from those that have visited the sites. I talked to not less than 4 board members who just in the last week have visited the routes, the potential pathways, the areas of the inside of Fort Ord that they enjoy walking, bicycling, hiking, doing different activities on Fort Ord. So, as we move through this process, we will continue to comply with each element of state law. In that regard, we are following our consultants' advice in framing and selecting the wording that will meet state law that follows the policies established in the base reuse plan as board members have asked. Specifically, in today's meeting, we are hopeful that the board will conclude on the goals and objectives. After hearing our presentation, hearing TAMC's presentation, and any additional objectives with the definitions our consultant has advised. Council has worked with us to assure we're complying with the court's decision in every way, and not just in the wording but in the spirit. So, once that is done, once we are doing all of this work, we will have the framework for moving into the scoping phase, and our consultants will then conduct a charrette-style meeting as part of that effort. In that regard, we are also continuing to seek your goals and to seek your input on the goals and objectives as we have amended from your comments at the past January meeting. So, we again say this is not a staff-driven process, as many of you have heard. Staff follows your direction. We want to move ahead, and with the broad comments and direction that the board has filtered up, recognizing that this process must continue to be open and fully complied, and agree that it is not just a legal work of art, it is an appropriate work that we all undertake. So today you'll hear from staff and consultants from both FORA and from TAMC to both refresh your discussion from last month and describe our adjustments to reflect your direction, and also specifically from TAMC on how they perceive East Side Parkway and the work that they are doing in this region. Thank you, Chair Rubio, Vice Chair, and the members of the board.
Thank you. I'll start this presentation off. I'm Jonathan Brinkman, Principal Planner at FORA, and thank you, Vice Chair Parker, for the opportunity to present today. So today in the presentation with TAMC, we're going to cover quickly some clarifications since the last meeting, go over the process, an overview of the process. Then I'll switch the reins and turn over to Todd Muck, Deputy Executive Director of TAMC. I believe they'll be supported by Frederick Ventner from Kimley Horn & Associates. Also, we did receive staff report questions yesterday, so when we transition back to FORA on the presentation, I'll cover some questions that came up. And then I'll summarize the revised goals and objectives and come back to the board for the recommendation. So just three quick clarifications I'd like to cover here from the last board meeting. So the first one here, Eastside Parkway is planned as a 2-lane arterial. I'll get into a little more detail on what that means. Blanco Road is referenced in the BRP, so I'll get into where that reference occurs in the base reuse plan. TAMC's 2017 FORA fee reallocation study shows a need to complete the FORA CIP, and just as a side note, Eastside Parkway is within the on-site part of the FORA CIP. We're providing these clarifications because accuracy of information is critical, and it's just important to get these facts out to the board and to the public. So the first of these clarifications, Eastside Parkway is a 2-lane arterial. So just a couple of definitions in the base reuse plan. Freeways are defined as high-speed facilities designed to carry large volumes of traffic. They have limited access roadways, and traffic can only enter and exit at specific locations. So we've heard sometimes Eastside Parkway referred to as a freeway. The fact is, it is an arterial. It's a 2-lane arterial described in FORA's capital improvement program. So an arterial is a range of roadways that includes urban streets and rural highways. It has signalized intersections designed to serve through traffic. And the source for those definitions is in the Base Reuse Plan Volume 2 on page 283. So just the reference for the Blanco Road being included within the stated purpose or the goal that was presented at the last meeting. So Giggling Road, in the Base Reuse Plan, Giggling Road Intergarrison Connector is described, and it says this facility is intended to be more attractive to drivers for accessing the southern portion of the reuse area from the east, thus reducing demand on Blanco Road and 12th Street Imgen corridor. And so the Giggling Road Connector is in the same geographical location as described as the Eastside Parkway in the FORA CIP. That reference is included in the Base Reuse Plan, Volume 2, on page 295. Sorry, the clicker seems to get stuck a little bit. Apologize for jumping there. So on the 2017 TAMC study shows the need. Clarification here. So in the TAMC study, we've received a number of statements that Eastside Parkway is not needed. There's no demonstrated need. TAMC study doesn't show the need. So just a clarification of what the study did show. So the 2017 TAMC FORA fee reallocation study showed the need for the FORA Capital Improvement Program list of roadway improvements. So as a note, Eastside Parkway is one of the FORA CIP on-site improvements. So here's how the TAMC's 2017 study showed the need. It set the level of service. So TAMC and FORA set the level of service D as an acceptable level of service. Level of service E and F were determined to be unacceptable levels of service, deficient. So that's what the study looked at. It looked at weaknesses in the system and the network. And it studied the roadways and looked at different conditions and how the system was effective in dealing with deficiencies. So I'm going to go over just a couple of scenarios that it looked at. So one scenario was the no-build scenario. And it came up with 7 roadways of deficiency in the no-build scenario. So what was the no-build scenario? It analyzed 19 roadway segments. 4 segments were not analyzed because they're not applicable to the scenario. So Eastside Parkway was not analyzed because in the no-build scenario, it's not built. These are all the existing roadways that were analyzed that exist today. Other roadways that weren't analyzed because they're not built include the Monterey Road interchange, and the 2nd Avenue extension into Marina. And so this scenario looked at the population which increased by 2035 and how the roadways held up in that scenario of increased population, increased vehicle trips, no improvements by the TAMC Regional Transportation Plan capital projects, and no improvements by the FORA Capital Improvement Program. Found 7 deficiencies. Another scenario to see how the FORA Capital Improvement Program projects upheld or how efficient they were in the 2035 scenario of increased population and increased trips on the roadways. It assumes here the 4 roadways are built in the alternative CIP, and the TAMC regional transportation projects are built. And it concluded that in this scenario, the roadways served adequate levels of service. So you'll note here, Eastside Parkway was a level service E, as borderline within a margin of error of a D, as well as Reservation Road was in a similar circumstance. Highway 1 also had borderline levels of service, and then on a PM trip, it came out as a level of service F. But in general, the roadways held up within the deficiency analysis, given the roadways were constructed in that 2035 scenario. Okay, so those are just some clarifications. Now I want to get into the process. So before we came here with the Eastside Parkway CEQA process here, we're in actually the pre-CEQA process. I want to give you clarification here. The Base Reuse Plan looked at the four-door transportation network in 1997. Eastside Road was one of those roadways in 1997. That was a program level CEQA document. And so that looked at the roadways, the network as a whole. Now we're narrowing down to a project level for Eastside Parkway. We've done this already on a number of roadways, including Jim Parkway, General Jim Moore Boulevard, California Avenue. So this is just one more roadway within the four-door network that we're looking at. And where we are today is in the pre-CEQA phase. You'll see up at the top of the screen here. And where we are going is in the CEQA phase. So today we're just looking at goals and objectives. We're not being pre-decisional about what the project will look like. But we need these goals and objectives to help us evaluate alternatives to the roadway. And so today we're looking for board direction on goals and objectives. And then coming up, we're looking towards March or April for a notice of preparation. So that'll open up a 30-day review period. And that will start the CEQA process. We'll have a project description, we'll have a statement of goals and objectives. Then we'll have an EIR public scoping meeting, and that will include the charrette style format. And we'll have a public, we anticipate in December of this year to have a draft EIR for a 45-day review period, and also have a public meeting during that review period. And then finally, we anticipate in July 2019 to bring back to the board project approval and EIR certification. Okay, just want to recap briefly the January 12th FORA board meeting. At that meeting, you received a presentation from staff providing context to Eastside Parkway, providing the roadway network planning that has been accomplished so far, also getting into the description on what CEQA goals and objectives are, and then we summarized what the December 6th public input we received was. We covered the schedule, which you saw today, and then we came back to the board for discussion and consideration of goals and objectives. The board also received public comment at that meeting, and the board directors asked questions, provided input, and the board had a motion to continue the item to a special meeting, which was canceled, and to include a TAMC presentation. So today we have TAMC staff here with that presentation, additional information on the roadway network, which is relevant to Eastside Parkway goals and objectives. And I will turn this over to my colleague, Todd Muck, Deputy Executive Director at TAMC.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, I wanted to acknowledge that with me here today I have Michael Zeller, who's a principal planner at the Transportation Agency, and he's been the project manager for our fee program, both the regional fee program that we do for covering all of Monterey County, and also the project manager when we worked helping FORA with FORA's fee program. And also Richard Deal, who's our traffic engineer and has a wealth of experience in the county, and has someone who we can rely on to provide some insight on how traffic moves around and impacts the community. After I provide my part of this presentation, Frederick Venner is going to go into the more intimate details of the travel model. And he worked for us, his firm Kimberly Horn worked for us when we provided assistance to the Fort Ord Reuse Authority on your fee reallocation study. He's worked for us on other projects using the regional travel demand model, so he's a very valuable resource to have here today. In context, the Transportation Agency is a countywide agency, and our goal is long-range planning, programming transportation funds that come to the county, and helping deliver projects. So I'm going to start providing some context of why the Transportation Agency is involved here and other projects that we're doing that are related in the area. Oh, this is touchy. So there are the board adopted integrated funding plan in December, and that integrated funding plan looked out our next 5 years of projects, and it mapped out a strategy to deliver our 9 major regional projects and get them funded, and to do the best possible job of matching the local Measure X funds that the Monterey County voters approved in November 2016, and also to maximize the amount of SB1 funds that we can get to come to Monterey County. So I'm going to talk about 3 of those 9 projects, and because they all relate to travel between Monterey and Salinas, and it's been part of the discussion of the Eastside Parkway project. This slide shows the Highway 68 Roundabout study that was recently approved by the TAMC board. And this project is going into the next phase, which is to work with Caltrans in the environmental analysis and preliminary engineering. And what the study showed was if you took out the signalized intersections on the Highway 68 corridor between Monterey and Salinas and replaced them with roundabouts, there would be some significant benefits to the traveling public. And we looked at this. This slide shows day of opening operations on the corridor, and the top long gray line is the delay that we now enjoy on the corridor, showing the existing conditions. And the study looked at enhancing the signal system or replacing them with roundabouts, and the roundabout alternative reduced the delay significantly. And just to put it in general terms, I describe this as if your commute was an additional 45 minutes because of going from Monterey to Salinas at the end of the day, you'd look at it drop down to about a half hour. It's really a significant improvement. And one of the main issues here is the Highway 68 corridor being a scenic state highway. A lot of contention on whether we should try to add capacity or do operational improvements on the corridor. And with this project, as it continues to go through the process of evaluation, we're hoping to see a lot of benefits on the operational side that will extend its existing operations and not have to go into widening the highway. The second project I wanted to point out is the Imogen Parkway project. And this project is part of the Marina-Salinas multimodal corridor. It is the segment that's down on this end, where you have right now, Imogen Parkway is 4 lanes all the way to Imogen Road, and then it drops down to 2 lanes, and then expands to 4 lanes at Reservation. And this project would widen that section to 4 lanes. And part of our multimodal project, where not only would it widen to 4 lanes, but it would also have enhanced bicycle facilities and prepare the corridor for additional transit service in the future. This project is a rendering of that project. It includes a revision to the bike lanes that are there existing, and also includes roundabouts at the existing signalized intersections. So it would have 4 roundabouts through the corridor, again helping with the flow of traffic, but also make it a better environment for both pedestrians and cyclists and transit users. This project is very close to construction. It's going into its final design phase. The Transportation Agency worked with the City of Marina, and we've submitted a pair of grant applications, both looking to secure SB1 funding to fully fund the project and matching with Measure X monies. And with those, this project can go into construction in 2019. So that's right around the corner. And then the Highway 1 busway, which is a project that's also it's in Measure X. It is eligible for the FORA CIP funds. And this project that Monterey Salinas Transit is currently doing a feasibility study looking at either buses on the shoulder, utilizing the shoulder capacity, where in periods of congestion, when there's stop-and-go traffic, a bus could more or less slowly go down the shoulder and bypass that traffic. The alternative to that is utilizing the Monterey branch line that is parallel to Highway 1 and put essentially a single-lane busway where the bus can also bypass current congestion. And Monterey Salinas Transit is in its final stages of producing a feasibility study. Lisa assured me that it will be ready in April for public review. Transportation Agency provided some of the funding for this, and of course it was in Measure X, so it's in our integrated funding plan to pursue the next stages after decision of how to move forward. So those 3 projects are examples of alternative routes or part of this corridor where we're actively trying to reduce congestion. Now, the regional travel demand model is a significant part of what I'm going to be sharing with you and what Frederick's going to be talking about on how different roads, what value they have, what type of vehicle flows they are going to accommodate in the future, And I'm going to go over a little bit of background of how this is produced, because I think it's important that everyone understands the both where the numbers come from and maybe some of the limitations of those numbers. Now, we work with the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments. There are 3 county metropolitan planning organizations, part of our constellation of acronyms. We work with AMBAG, and what they do is they produce a forecast for population and employment and housing units for the Monterey Bay Area, Monterey, Santa Cruz, and San Benito counties. They produce the regional travel demand model, which takes those forecasts and breaks them down into small areas, and they align it with the jurisdictions and your land use designations through your general plans. So what happens is you have this big 3-county forecast, and it gets broken down farther and farther and farther until essentially block-sized groups of where population, employment, and land use is expected to grow or change over a 20-plus year time period. And that's important because what the travel demand model does, it takes those trips that come from housing units or jobs, and it loads those trips onto the road network and distributes where they start and where they end, their origin and destination, and it calculates the amount of trips that go on to each specific road. So we're talking about how many trips would take East Side Parkway if it was built. This is where it comes from. It is, as I mentioned, it's coordinated with each of the cities, and it reflects the general plan designations, and in the Fort Ord area, it reflects the base reuse plan. So in the case of the FORA Capital Improvement Program and our reallocation study that was done, it took the land uses that were assumed in the locations where they were expected to be. In this case, the most controversial one would be the Downs project and the development of that area. Those land uses in those locations loads on the local road network, just like as the Dunes project continues to get built out, as the seaside developments happen where they're expected to happen. Those are all included in the travel demand model. Those land uses all load into the local road network and get distributed throughout the region in the regional travel demand model. Now, these things get updated very... wow. Just wanted to point out that travel demand models and forecasts all get updated regularly, and they change. And one of the points that I made of using the land uses as they're designated is we can't make up a future land use designation based on what we think is going to happen. It has to be what the jurisdiction say is going to happen and what they've adopted. The model gets updated, the population employment forecast gets updated every 4 or 5 years, and 2 things happen. They do an additional, the forecast for population and employment and land use and housing reflect the most current thought, and the thinking changes, so you want to update that on a regular basis. And then the modeling update reflects new technologies and changes in how we travel, and continually tries to reflect our expectations of change. So here's a nice slide of electric vehicles. The bottom graph picture kind of is connected vehicles. It's one of the technologies that you can expect to happen in the future, where vehicles will be able to communicate back and forth between themselves, between signals, and enhance our travel system, become more efficient. And as those technologies come on and you understand them more, the model gets developed, gets updated to reflect those. So in the context of Fort Ord and what Transportation Agency does as part of our work with FORA, Transportation Agency has a regional development impact fee that all new development pays a fee associated with a new housing unit, a new business building that gets built, and those fees are calculated based on the travel demand model, and the associated travel impacts are tied to regional projects that have been identified. So the fee goes into this list of regional projects and thus helps build them and relieve the impacts of that new development. In the past, the FORA zone, which is blue here, has been a donut hole in the TAMC's fee program. And that's on purpose because FORA collects its own fees and you don't double charge a project for fees. In other cases, for example, the city of Salinas, many jurisdictions have their own fee program, and we carefully back out the payments for projects. So a project might be, the transportation project might show up in both the city of Salinas's fee and the TAMC regional fee, and we don't charge the project twice. We just make sure that they're accounted that way. So in this case, we have always left the FORA zone out of the regional fee program, and the FORA fees collect the impacts for the projects that are identified. The transportation agency is in the process of updating our fee program. We do that every 5 years, and one of those exercises is showing it with the FORA fee zone in. So as you go through your transition plan, that information will be available. Because we have the experience with the regional fee program, the transportation agencies worked with FORA to update the FORA fee program. And while our staff has the experience, we've hired consultants to do the travel modeling work. And the most recent work has been last year with the reanalyzation of the FORA capital improvement obligations. And prior to that was the 2014 Capital Improvement Program review. So this is the reason why the transportation agency has been so involved on the FORA fee program, because of the past experience and also our regional fee program work. So with what we did in the past fee program work is identify base year conditions, forecast future development impacts, and link the FORA transportation improvements to development. Oop, jump. So here's the slide that we all came to see. And from the 2017 fee program, looking specifically at the East Side Parkway link, and that is not the road, it's the point from generally Giggling over to East Side Parkway. It could be anywhere, I'm sorry, East Side Parkway, Inner Garrison Road. It doesn't reflect a specific route, it just reflects those two starting ending points. And Frederick's going to talk about that some more. But of the trips that would use East Side Parkway, the 18,586, approximately 37% of those trips are non-FORA trips. The origin and destination of those trips do not start or end on the former corridor property. So that would be your regional traffic using the East Side Parkway link. That and the other trips are either going to or coming from or staying within the former corridor. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Frederick, and then I'll be available with the team for questions later. It's touchy.
Thank you, Todd. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting. I'm delighted to present to you modeling results, and we have listened to what you said, and we have a couple of slides we're going to share with you to put some perspective on East Side Parkway. And so by all means, it's a finalized analysis. I think it's going to give a little bit of an idea of what the model says will happen with travel between now and the future. So this slide comes from the FORA fee program, and it shows all the projects. This way. So it shows FORA projects from the fee program, and so let's orientate Salinas. There's Marina, the Peninsula. There's East Side Parkway running there. That's Intergarrison, and there's Emgen. So the projects that are listed here either include capacity improvement projects or what we call operational improvement projects. So a capacity improvement project would mean that you can add more vehicles onto that roadway network. If it's an operational improvement, what it means is you could travel faster. And the great example that Todd told you about was Highway 68. So we're going to see about the same volumes, but you're going to be able to move a little faster because the intersection control improves. What I've done here is to identify in the fee program with the blue circles what we would call operational improvement projects, and the rest of them and those were on Jonathan's list earlier, would all be capacity improvement projects. So the ones here would be 8th Street and Marina. The one here would be the Monterey interchange. We would have South Boundary Road, the operational improvements along 68. All the other projects, like I said, would be capacity improvement projects. A little bit of modeling 101 for you. So for those who do not know how modeling works, so Todd explained that we have origins and destinations. People live a certain location, they go work in another location. What the model does, it tries to link those two locations based on, number one, existing inputs, so we know how people travel now, and then adding road network to the model, and then the model pushes the traffic through on where the roads are and where the capacities will be. Those roads are really lines. It's not an alignment specifically, although if we know that we have an existing road, that would be an alignment. But for future roads, that could be an alignment. So we have options to move those around. Okay. Eastside Parkway, right now it sort of follows what was generally anticipated previously, what it would look like and where it would run. If it was a straight line, if I draw a straight line from Eucalyptus all the way to Intergarrison, we may not see that much traffic change in the future, but we haven't analyzed that, so just a heads up. It's a desire line for where people want to move between their origins and their destinations. The AMBAG model calibrates pretty well for regional roads. It is a regional travel demand model, and those calibration results are per Caltrans standards. It is not very accurate when coming down to residential streets, but then again, it's a regional model, it's not a local model. Also, the model does not take into consideration if you have a signal or a roundabout at an intersection. This is a regional model. It really looks at capacities on segments, so it cannot tell you, hey, the model is going to be better or travel is going to be better if there's a signal or a roundabout. There's more refined models called microsimulation models that would be able to tell you that effect on traffic operations. So this is the what we call the FORA area, and that's in the black boundary here. Okay. And then the rest of it is all Monterey County or the cities. Now these little blue lines that you see, and they've all got numbers in them, we call those traffic analysis zones or TAZs. Those are typically set up based on a road or a boundary or a river or any other measure that we sort of determine geographically would be significant in how people decide where they want to travel. Then what we do in the model is, so let's look at this one here. If people live here and they need to travel, we say, well, there's so many homes living here, and then we load the traffic from this location onto the network, and then the model knows from data that we've collected, census data, where people live and where they want to go work, and then it will distribute the traffic through the model. I'm going to present to you the 2010 base year data, and by no means is this, so this is straight what we call raw model volumes. They haven't been adjusted or manipulated. This is straight from the AMBAG model as we have it right now. So this is 2010 conditions, and we've highlighted the major roads, so we can see Davis Road, this is Highway 68, Reservation Road, Blanco Road comes around there, we see Imgen, Reservation Road going into Marina, into Garrison, and of course 68, and then General Jim Moore on this side. Giggling and a little bit of light fighter there. Volumes here shows what it was based on those counts in 2010. And I'm going to do a comparison a little later on, so I want you just to see what we did. So for 2035 conditions, this is the model as it is adopted in the Regional Transportation Plan. This is as it is today, in which all the cities and the county gave their input to what is we think future land use development would be and where vehicles would travel on the roadway. We can see in this one there's an Eastside Parkway alignment with Eastside Parkway volumes on it. This model also then here include what we call the RTP built-out network. Jonathan spoke about that. So all the projects that are included in the RTP, let's say it's the widening of Davis Road, it's the widening of Reservation Road, it is the widening of Imgen Parkway, Eastside Parkway, And many of the other projects that you saw for FORA, plus that was in the regional transportation network, are included in this model result. Then we ran a scenario where we actually removed the downs and we kept Eastside Parkway in, because I think there's a question a lot of people were asking, well, why do we need Eastside Parkway? So I'm going to share some of those results with you. And then we, okay, let me go back a little. So Seaside's in the process of updating their general plan. It's not been adopted, so I didn't want to take out the downs, so we said let's keep the downs in, but if we have no Eastside Parkway, basically their access is going to be a little constrained, so we just moved and relocated the downs a little bit, and we kept the housing. So basically the housing and the jobs that we're forecasting stays about the same, and we assumed that they would load probably somewhere here onto General Jim Moore Boulevard. Again, just a relative location, but keeping the land uses intact. Now, what's really important is to understand commute. We know that commute pattern between Salinas, right, and the Salinas Valley and the peninsula. We know a lot of people that live here and they travel on a daily basis and they come work here. There's also a lot of people that work here and actually travel in the opposite direction, and they go live here and go work elsewhere. It's a heavier demand westbound in the morning and a heavier demand eastbound in the afternoon. So what I did was I draw a screen line all the way down, and I want to capture the vehicles that travel on 68, the vehicles that would travel on Eastside Parkway, the vehicles that would travel on Intergarrison and Imgen and Reservation. That tells me, it will give me a really good idea of what happens with this regional travel that we see on a daily basis. So I'm going to share with you some results. So you will see here at the bottom, we have the 2010 year that I showed you the model results, 2035, and then we have the 2035 with no downs, but Eastside Parkway is in. And then we have the one that says no east side, but we relocated the downs a little bit south to keep the housing the same. So I'm going to walk you slowly through this. There's a lot of information in these graphs. So the roads on the screen line that we're looking at is Reservation Road, Imgen Parkway, Intergarrison, Eastside Parkway, and Highway 68. So those, as I drew the screen line, those are the roads that we know travel happen east and west over that screen line. These are the 2010 results. No Eastside Parkway in because it's not built. This is the 2035 results with all the roads built out. So this is as the regional transportation plan looks like today, what it looks like today. You can see how all the roads pick up significantly growth except Intergarrison goes down. But it's very logical because we're building Eastside Parkway right next to it, and a lot of traffic moves to Eastside Parkway. I can also share with you that CSUMB is in the plan, in the regional transportation plan. CSUMB is not planned to have traffic go through the campus, so the traffic needs to go elsewhere, and the model is pushing it to Eastside Parkway. So that's why we see the reduction from 2010 and the huge increase on Eastside Parkway. Highway 68 goes up slightly. The main reason is that Highway 68 is actually at capacity right now. We make the operational improvements, but we're not adding a lot of capacity, so the model will not send a lot of trips there. A very interesting phenomenon that we didn't know, but what we saw when we did the screen line, if anybody had to guess all these increases from yellow to blue, how many trips do you think we're adding to the network? On the screen line right now, we have about 64,000 cars crossing on a daily basis. It goes up to over 90, I think it's 96,000. So we're adding almost 50% growth regionally, east-west along the screen line. The next alternative is if we do no downs. So the reservation goes up a little bit, so the downs. So the model is tweaking a little bit. The model is not perfect, but we're going to see some good results. Imgen Parkway stays about the same. Intergarrison goes down, right, because there's less traffic on it. Eastside Parkway goes down a little bit, but not that much. Highway 68 goes down a little bit, but it stays about the same. So everybody may ask, well, but Eastside Parkway, why does this happen? if we remove the land uses away from the downs, there's a new road in the model where people can actually travel on. And the model is looking in a system along that east-west line where people want to go to and where they live. So what the model is saying, I want to send some traffic to Eastside Parkway. And that, think about it, if people are constantly looking for a shorter commute from Salinas to Monterey. I heard just the other day that currently cut-through traffic to the campus is up because Highway 1 is so congested. The green lines now reflect no east side, but we do move the downs. So what happened was, I'm going to go back here. So let's do reservation. So now we take basically capacity away, right, in that east-west movement. We still have the same land uses, that same travel demand between east and west, but it's getting severely constrained. So we see a slight increase on Reservation Road, and this is really that's at capacity too. Engine Parkway jumps up quite a bit. It probably goes from almost at capacity or working fine to very congested. Into Garrison, which we would expect, see how that jumped up significantly from about 5,000 vehicles to 23,000 vehicles. So it's being a two-lane road, it's also at capacity. No Eastside Parkway, and see 68 gets pushed even up a little more. So conclusions from this analysis, and it puts a relative perspective on that need for Eastside Parkway and what the model does with travel. It definitely benefits local trips in the forward order development with some regional traffic relief. 20% of the growth, that 33,000 cars that we know is going to grow between 2010 and 2035, 20% of that traffic is being assigned in the model to Eastside Parkway. Almost no change to Highway 68 commute traffic. Okay. Right, we can go back to this graph, see how flat the graphs look here. Oops. The model, let me go back to that's an important one. So connections required to the regional road network. I want to go back to the model plot so we can talk a little bit about this one. So if one looks at where Eastside Parkway is, it connects from a location here, and it's at East Garrison, and it connects here to Eucalyptus Road. To get cars from in the Salinas Valley to get to this location, we need improvements on Davis Road, we need improvements on Reservation Road, which are in the plan, in the RTP plan, but very far out. There's currently no funding. Is that correct, Todd? No funding earmarked for it, but it is in the plan. Sorry, yeah, I should have said Davis, yes, but not for reservation. And also, it's not a straight shoot, right? If you look at 68, these are really a straight shoot. Blanco, MGen is also a straight shoot to one. But there's a link here that connects sort of a troublesome and needing improvements here to work. And as soon as it hits Seaside, the model is really struggling to get the trips to where they should go, which is, of course, to Highway 1, Seaside, and further south into Monterey. And that is because there's so many local roads, and that's something that, I think as the process moves forward, things that one can look at. So a little challenging for the model to work on the east and the west end with capacities and making the trips work. We'll go back to the conclusion slide. Access to Highway 1, that's really what the model is asking for on the east side, even though we also know that Highway 1 is constrained, but there are plans or it's in the plan to improve it, not that it may happen, but it is in the RTP. And then those connections to the regional network that's also required to really make Eastside Parkway work. If we're only going to build Eastside Parkway right now, we have Blanco Road, we have Reservation Road, we have Davis Road that are all constricted. I think that's my conclusion.
Okay, so at the risk of having the longest presentation at FORA ever, I'm going to come back to the board with just some questions we received this week. So I want to thank Michael DeLappa from Landwatch for submitting questions on Thursday ahead of the FORA board meeting. We're going to cover most of those questions here with responses, and then queue up the goals and objectives for the board's discussion. So the first question we received here was what section and pages of the 1997 base use plan identifies the East Side Road as mitigation? So just taking it step by step here, the FEIR identified an impact. So in the circulation and traffic section of the FEIR, the impact was increased travel demand on the regional transportation system, and that's on page 4-108 of the final environmental impact report, and also identified a mitigation for that impact. And it said, as a mitigation, a development resource management plan would be established by FORA, and that's on page 4-112. And then that DRIMP, the DRIMP that FORA established, it states that FORA shall fund its fair share of on-site, off-site, and regional roadway and transit capital improvements. And that's based on the nexus analysis by TAMC. And that's in the Base Use Plan Volume 1, page 195. And so Eastside Parkway, as we've mentioned a number of times with this presentation, the FEIR identifies Eastside Road within the on-site network, and in that EIR defines it as connecting from Engine Parkway to Giggling Road, and that's on pages 4-104 to page 4-106. There's a whole list of the FORA network roadways. So the answer is it's included in the base use plan and its final EIR, and those are the references. Okay, we summarized here 10 questions, so I'll just keep going through these. The next question was, would you please clarify why this contradicts the article in the Monterey County Weekly? So I'm not quoting the full article here, just noting here that the weekly article does not provide evidence for a statement that the only required traffic mitigations under the BRP are off-site projects. And just stating the fact I just stated in the last slide, in fact, establishing the DRIMP, which requires FORA to fund its fair share of on-site, off-site, and regional projects and transit improvements, is a BRP mitigation. Okay, the next question was, is the 2017 study the basis for advising the FORA board that the Eastside Parkway should be the highest priority? And the response is no. The FORA board prioritized Eastside Parkway funding in the 2009-2010 mid-year CIP. It's maintained that funding priority subsequently with each annual approval of the CIP. And so the 2017 study clearly wasn't completed in 2009, 2010, and subsequently until just last year. The next question was, why are underlying assumptions of the 2007 study, what are the underlying assumptions of the 2017 study no build scenario? So just to kind of go back and summarize what those assumptions were, it's using the AMBAG's projected population growth, which we heard about in some detail by Todd Muck, that occurs by year 2035. And then in that scenario, it assumes there's no TAMC regional transportation plan, nor are there any FORA CIP improvements on the network. So that's the no build scenario. Sorry. Okay, the next question was, did you evaluate other roadway improvements vis-a-vis the no-build alternative to determine optimal $18 million investment in roads? Simple answer is no. The 2017 study looked at the FORA CIP, the build FORA CIP and the build alternative CIP scenario improvements and their effectiveness in providing the roadway capacity given the 2035 conditions. So it didn't look at all the options. That's more of a project level EIR type of evaluation. Question 6 was, if FORA made investment in Eastside Parkway, how many existing roadways would still operate at deficient levels of service? So there's a number of factors that would be involved in that. There's considering the other FORA CIP improvements, the TAMC regional transportation plan improvements, population growth, what time frame you're looking at. Again, that would probably, doing a traffic study with an EIR would provide more information on traffic conditions and what are the effects on the existing roadways around Eastside Parkway. Question 7, The question was, had FORA staff previously asked TAMC for a presentation on Eastside Parkway and an opinion about its regional benefits? So FORA and TAMC, we coordinate on a regular basis. TAMC attends the FORA Administrative Committee meetings, and every year the CIP projects are prioritized at the Administrative Committee and forwarded on to the board. TAMC's prepared 3 four-door transportation studies in coordination with FORA, and those have been presented to the Administrative Committee along with the FORA board, and TAMC's provided presentations. So Eastside Parkway has always been part of the FORA network that's been studied. These studies have evaluated the effectiveness of the FORA CIP, and these include Eastside Parkway in the FORA CIP. Okay, the next question was, why did staff mischaracterize the overwhelming public opposition to the format of the December workshop? So, to the best of our ability, staff characterized the public meeting comments impartially in the staff report. We included a section called Criticism of the Process, and that's in Exhibit B, an attachment to the staff report. Question 9 was, why does the staff report exclude quantifying the number of people testifying, their letters and emails in support and opposition? So staff was given the task to obtain the goals and objectives from the public. So that was a primary focus of the staff report and its attachments. We want to provide information to the board about the feedback we heard about goals and objectives. Quantification is something we could do if we're directed to do that. Sorry. Okay. So, just recapping here, where we've been so far, what you've heard tonight. You've heard clarifications on 3 items at the beginning of the presentation. You've been given a process overview that looked at where we are in the process. We're in the pre-CEQA process. You've heard a summary of the January meeting. You've received a presentation from TAMC and their consultant. Just to summarize some of the points in that presentation, there was a look at what was modeled in 2017 with the study. That 63% of the trips for Eastside Parkway was modeled to be local trips, 37% was modeled to be regional. Kimley Horn's preliminary modeling showed that with Eastside Parkway, there's limited Highway 68 traffic relief, but there is an improved regional commute. And then we went over staff report questions just now. Okay. So getting to the main dinner item, the meat of the discussion here, we have the recommended goal. So I'm just going to provide a quick summary of the goal and get into the objectives. Just want to note that the full text to the goal and objectives is included in Exhibit A, which is was provided on the table for the public and at the table for the board members. And the recommended goal here is to reduce the future traffic congestion along Highway 1, 12th Street, now Jim Parkway, Blanco Road, and the Del Monte 2nd Avenue, General Jim Moore Boulevard corridor. A second point to the goal is to maintain recreational, cultural, and natural resources consistent with the reuse plan, final environmental impact report, and the development resource and management plan. Just to note, the development resource management plan is part of the base reuse plan. Okay, so getting into the objectives, we just, as staff, kind of categorize these, and to some extent, some of the objectives fit into a mobility type of objective, the base reuse plan as a source, connectivity, and in coming up with the goals and objectives, we looked at the base reuse plan as a source of information to come up with goals and objectives. We looked at the public comment received at the December 6th public input meetings. We also looked at the letters and emails received. And we've cited those in the Exhibit A before you. So on mobility, an example of a mobility objective is acceptable LOS throughout the network. That's level of service. Example of a connectivity objective is to serve the area south of CSUMB. Okay, some additional objective categories here. We have minimize disruption. An example of that one is minimize disrupting any community expansion and circulation. An example of a safety objective is to consider safety of residents, pedestrians, bicyclists, and wildlife. An example of the environment objective is protect habitat management areas from edge effects. And just to go over some track changes. So we took board input at the last meeting and made some adjustments to the objectives. You'll see here we crossed out an objective based on board input, avoid bisecting CSUMB campus. We were asked, make that more expansive. So we replaced it with minimize disrupting any community, including its expansion and circulation. And then we've added a sub-objective underneath provide direct and efficient linkages from former Fort Ord lands to the regional transportation system. This is all based on board member input. So that added objective is consider best practices in transportation planning, including regional and systemic improvements such as roundabouts and autonomous vehicles. And then there are 4 added objectives based on the input from the board. And these included improve the mobility of emergency system responders, including but not limited to firefighter access, improve NPC, CSUMB, and other educational institutions' access for students, staff, and faculty, utilize the existing roadways as the foundation for the future network, and comply with policies and programs of the reuse plan. So that's bringing us to the recommendation to the board. The recommendation today is for the board to discuss and consider approval of Eastside Parkway goals and objectives. It's Exhibit A in front of you. And in its consideration, the board may approve Exhibit A as presented or as modified by board motion. And we are available for your questions.
Okay, we'll go ahead with the questions. Director Edlin.
Yes, 3 good briefings, much appreciated. Again, I think the focus and the mission we're here today is to look at, discuss, and approve the Eastside Parkway goals and objectives. They're similar to motherhood and apple pie. There's very little problems there. I suspect a large number of people here want to discuss whether Eastside Parkway should or should not exist along that line. I think that would be outside of our basic goals and objectives. I believe the discussion of the actual alignment of the Eastside Parkway or proposed east-west corridor in that parkway area, or whether the Eastside Parkway should or should not exist, would come under the next phase when we're looking at the California Environmental Quality Act doing the environmental impact report. Is that correct?
Correct.
So it's the next phase during CEQA. When we go through that process, that's where we're going to go through the sausage making of determining what we want to do, whether we want to do it, where that alignment goes, and everything else. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. It's a beautiful day outside. It's 4:30. It's 70 degrees, so maybe we can minimize the discussions in here. Not to stop anybody from testifying, but it's a beautiful day outside.
Any other questions for staff? Director Schreiner and then Director Alexander.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in some of the assumptions for the population projections. And when we talk about 20% for the next 25 years in my mind is 2043. The year 2043 would be 25 years from now. So I just wanted to make sure I understood the population projection and then also consider where we expect that population to grow. It seems like to me Monterey is kind of built out. I'm sorry, Monterey. But there are some places where I would expect there to be more growth. And in the modeling, was that taken into consideration, what I could kind of call a microburst area of growth? It might be in the vicinity of the dunes, say in Monterey, in Marina, but not necessarily in Monterey. And then the idea of building more roads to carry more people who are going to work. I think it's fantastic that Monterey wants to develop 20% more jobs, right? I mean, it would have to be a big increase in jobs, a real big increase in jobs for all those people to travel there. And in that public hearing that was mentioned, there was a hospitality representative who mentioned, already it's about 25,000 workers that are traveling from Salinas to Monterey. And I don't know if he is anticipating a 20% increase But I know from listening to Hospitality John Narigi at the recent evidentiary hearings in San Francisco, he was saying they would like to get the hotels from 72% occupancy to 80%. So that's only an 8% increase. And I don't know if there's a direct relationship between occupancy and jobs. Like, is that an 8% increase in jobs? Or why are we expecting so many people to be traveling into Monterey for more work? So I don't know if that was discussed in the modeling. To me, the job creation most recently has been, again, Marina. And so would the Eastside Parkway be the best for that direction? And then also I want to mention when the man from the hospitality was talking at the public hearing, I was thinking, well, 25,000 people, probably some pretty large employers. Why are they not considering a bus? You know, Chomp has an employee bus. The aquarium uses employee bus. So can this autonomous bus thing, I think it was briefly mentioned in the staff report, but not in the modeling, can people be encouraged to take care of their own workers rather than burdening the taxpayers with increasing road construction to help the job people? And what I would just love to say as a non-voting FORA board member is I would like to see FORA focusing their staff more on job creation right here, right next to some of the housing, instead of focusing on a road to carry people past Fort Ord. I think Salinas has potential for growth. Salinas could focus on jobs. But I think the future is here. I think that young people are switching away from cars. And I would just love to see for board members who seeing that vision of the future and providing leadership for our young people. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other questions for staff? Cynthia, and then Gail, and Dennis. Dennis first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Very well done and all inclusive. But I have a question. I think is on the numbers, and then one about a possibility of a parkway of some sorts feeding into possible future development housing. But I'll let that one wait because I don't know that we're there yet. So 37% of present traffic does not go through Fort Ord areas now, but would if there were another thoroughfare. Is that correct, or would that 37% not use it at all?
So the 37% comes from the modeling of looking at the year 2035, where we've got increased population. We have Eastside Parkway built, along with the TAMC and FORA CIP projects. Just looking at what's the split on those people taking those trips on Eastside Parkway. 37% come off of Fort Ord, start off of Fort Ord and end off of Fort Ord, and then 63% either end on Fort Ord or start on Fort Ord or with internal to Fort Ord.
Okay, so 2035. So that 37% wouldn't. Their destination is not going through Fort Ord at all. I mean, let's say they're starting in Monterey Peninsula and going to Santa Cruz.
That's correct.
Okay, I see. And what? Because I wasn't sure before this. I've heard two-lane arterial. I've heard other things. So a two-lane arterial would help that cause. Is that enough to help that cause?
That's what we heard from Frederick Ventnor from Kimley Horn, that the number of CIP projects provide capacity, so they provide additional room for vehicles to travel, and Eastside Parkway is one of those.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, Cynthia. Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I do have questions. On the TAMC report, they were modeling from between 2010 and 2035 was a 25% population increase, or 20% population increase. And is that a reasonable expectation for population increase?
I'll speak a little bit, or Frederick, you want to speak on AMBAG's process, how they come up with the model?
So that you relied on AMBAG. The base reuse plan anticipated a 1% per year through 2015, and it did not happen. And our base reuse plan planned for that growth. So I just I know you didn't do it, Fred, that came from Anbag, but it may not be a reasonable number. But I did want to ask further question on that. So in the TAMC model, this map where you referred to, Todd referred to the donut being FORA, where FORA collects the fees, its own fees, the donut hole. Thank you. That TAMC's the donut and we are the donut hole. Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Lamard. But even though we collect our fees for the roads that are in the donut hole, we still have a liability to TAMC for the regional impacts of the growth within the donut hole on the roads in the donut, correct? And in fact, we have that budgeted to happen and pay roughly $35 million, somewhere way down in our CIP, a decade from now or 2 decades from now. Is that correct?
So I've got the CIP in front of me. I could tell you when we start funding regional transportation projects with TAMC.
But we will owe part of what we collect to TAMC, and that is to assist with the connections on Highway 1, the connection at Davis and Reservation, Davis and Blanco, the regional impacts. We're still liable to TAMC for that, correct? Please.
The answer is you don't owe it to TAMC, you owe it to the projects that are identified in the CIP. And many of those projects are not managed by TAMC. So in the case of Reservation or Davis, those are an unincorporated county. The county's the lead on those projects.
So we'll pay the county.
You owe that money to the county. There's a few projects like Highway 156 where TAMC's taking the lead on, and we do manage that in conjunction with Caltrans. And so that's more of the type of...
Who manages the problem that's at Monterey and Fremont?
Monterey and Fremont is in the city of Seaside, so that's their problem.
And that's, but those...
Thank you for that, Todd.
Yeah.
Okay, but those are places where we will owe money for regional impacts.
But seriously, that's
and basically it's everybody's problem.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how we prioritize these so I can help you.
But in all seriousness, that project is identified where the busway project would have to go through that intersection. That's the type of project where we're looking at it, trying to build the busway, improve the intersection for everyone else. I mean, it's one of those things where we're looking at it from multiple angles.
Okay, so if we had funding to put towards that project when you're doing that project, that would be beneficial to coordinate that and do that.
Definitely.
And would TAMC agree that that's a problem area currently in 2018?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So that while I have TAMC here, this is so nice. The Imjin Parkway widening. And I know that Imjin Parkway is a TAMC project right now that you've applied for additional funding to make it 4 lanes the entire way. And when that's 4 lanes the entire way, that will be an east-west arterial that will help with traffic movement both on Fort Ord and the traffic regionally, correct?
Yes, but that is a City of Marina project that we are strongly supporting.
So my question now is, does FORA contribute to that, any of its impact fees? I didn't see that when it came in front of my council, and it was a question that I had, and if not, why not?
So FORA, this brings up the interesting background on the fee allocation studies. So in 1997, there was a Fort Ord transportation study, and under that study, FORA had a partial obligation to Imjin Parkway, 12th Street Imjin Parkway. So FORA made the connection with Highway 1, improved that connection, and took it all the way to Imjin Road, which connects south to CSUMB. That was FORA's obligation in the CIP. FORA retired that obligation, received grants for a lot of that work. So then the next version of the CIP, the next transportation study in 2005, FORA worked with TAMC and identified the fund local projects first. So it funded the on-site projects 100%. So Imjin Parkway was already retired. It was off the list. City of Marina took it on as a development impact fee project within the City of Marina. So we can't collect this 2 fees for the same project. We both have our separate CIPs. That's the answer on that.
Okay. So the question that I have looking at results for East Side Parkway, looking at the East Side Parkway link, the start and ending points. One of the questions I had, we had 63% of trips FORA related, 37% of trips non-FORA related. I'm not exactly sure what the non-FORA
Those
related.
are trips that did not start or end within the FORA boundaries. So those are trips that are the model assigned to Eastside Parkway. They would take Eastside Parkway, but they would essentially drive through the FORA boundaries.
Okay. And just a general question, 2-lane roads, there's a rule of thumb, maybe this is a Fred question, is that they handle perhaps, I thought it was like 15,000 trips per day, and are, what's the capacity of a 2-lane road?
It's a loaded question.
It is? Sorry.
So
thought
think
it was
about
a math question.
Loaded math. So think about, because Highway 68 is a 2-lane road, right? But it doesn't have a lot of intersections, so its capacity is actually much higher. We see it at 28,000, 30,000. But if you take, let me think of a quick example, any other road that has frequent signals in it, and so immediately you have more, if I can put it, points where people would stop, so that capacity goes way down. So it varies between, you can get it as bad as 15,000, and it get it as good as on 68, about 28,000.
So if Eastside Parkway is going to start in the middle of someplace, which you've indicated, or Tamsi's indicated, that there's no good connection at Davis and Reservation, and there's no connection to Highway 1 at the south end, that you're dumping through the local streets, doesn't that fall within the problem that even if you put Eastside Parkway that has capacity, is only as good as your 2 start and ending points?
It's partially true, because I also need to remember that all the traffic does not only go to Monterey. We have growth in Seaside, we have lots of growth in Marina, we have the CSUMB campus that's going to grow, so quite a few trips end up in those cities. So just remember that. But the fact is that capacity, think about Eastside Parkway is going to have maybe only a few intersections on it, so it gets to the higher end of what it could handle. But the moment they hit General Jim Moore, General Jim Moore is really the next higher capacity roadway, but going further, from where it ends at about 8th Street, Eucalyptus, it's really hard. You got to go make lefts and rights, Giggling, Colonel Durham, Light Fighter, and then you hit Highway 1. So that's the thing. It's not a very obvious route. And then on the other side, at Eastside Parkway, at East Garrison, the same. You got to make a couple of turns to get onto a road. Plus, then we don't have capacity on that side.
I'd like to add to that because it's always been anticipated that the highway, General Jim Moore, was extending down to Highway 218, which was a connector for Monterey, not Light Fighter, not Giggling, but that's why General Jim Moore was widened all the way down to Delray Oaks. And they have a development that's going to finish that 4-lane to Highway 218, where you can get to 68, or you can go down 218 to Highway 1.
Thank you. So looking at, Fred, you are the one that gave us this map that had the blue circles, and you explained capacity, meaning more vehicles, and operational means they move faster. And so I just wanted to go back to that slide if you can, because I think you had 3 blue circles, and one of them was, if I want to confirm that I understood this correctly, because 8th Street has not been prioritized in our CIP, that you had that as a blue circle, that we would have operational, meaning the cars would get through faster if we finish the 8th Street connection in your modeling?
So it doesn't go through, and it's pretty up and down. So, and I think Marina keeps that as a 2-lane road. So we're not adding lanes to make it a 4-lane road. So That's why I say we're not adding capacity to it.
Right, but you had improved operation, and it connects with east-west inner Garrison, north of the campus, where we have a roundabout right now where Whispering Oaks is. The infrastructure is there.
Yep.
Okay. And so that would make, it is blue, which means
it's
goes
operational.
Smoother and traffic moves quicker. And those other blues are the same in those other
Yes,
locations,
yes.
if you
Yeah.
finish those. So then going to your 2010, 2035, these two pieces of paper are really informative, and I just want to be sure that, because I'm not sure the public can read all those numbers, is that with this projected traffic increase based on development, based on the increase in population, you've mapped this, and the 2035 conditions includes an East Side Parkway. And so we have East Side Parkway in 2035 having 9,400 trips in part of it, and I'm reading your numbers, about 9,000. But we get down to where it connects at General Jim Moore, and in 2010 we had 4,126 at the intersection down here where General Jim Moore hits Canyon Del Rey. But if the East Side Parkway goes in, and by 2035 we're going to have 15,000 there, correct? And what your maps are projecting that on the Highway 1, our counts go from roughly 34.5% to 43.3% and 52.3%. So we are increasing the burden on already congested locations. Even by adding East Side Parkway, we haven't alleviated the traffic concerns regionally that people like me complain about because I drive to Monterey. We've exacerbated them. Okay, thank you. And then okay, we didn't alleviate them. We've increased their congestion numbers. No, well, that's how I read it. So,
Okay,
yeah.
we're not,
So
not going
I
to
want to
engage in
go
a dialogue there.
now to the statement that Jonathan made. And the statement that Jonathan made was that every year the administrative committee prioritizes our projects. And I do often attend the administrative committee meeting, and I do understand that in our CIP, in the addendum A-1 continuing through A-5, is how we prioritize our transportation or any CIP projects. And the statement therein states that the FORA board has set that the administrative committee is going to prioritize the projects, but it also states the FORA board has set the two top transportation priorities as East Side Parkway and South Boundary Road. So those have not been reprioritized since 2009 as stated in our staff report, correct?
Correct. The board hasn't changed their prioritization yet.
So the admin committee only looks at the other projects and prioritizes them.
Correct. Yes.
And in the CIP, we set forth an evidence-based prioritization process that we are expected the admin committee to start with and then make recommendations to the board, which include that they prioritize what those 8 factors should be, and project is necessary to mitigate the reuse plan is number 1. Project environmental design is complete is number 2. And number 3 and highest priority is project can be completed prior to FORA's 2020 transition. Will the East Side Parkway be completed by 2020 transition?
No. Most likely no.
Okay.
I think it's important to note that the administrative committee makes recommendations to this board. This board makes the decision. There was a special case with East Side Parkway, a debate that occurred in 2009-2010, where the board wanted to get more engaged in the process, where the board made those decisions. Since that time, staff, working with the administrative committee, came up with an analytical tool to help the administrative committee work through these processes and then make recommendations onto the board. So what you're talking about is a tool that the administrative committee used.
But they haven't applied those to East Side Parkway. The 2 that were set by the board have been excluded from that process at least since 2009 is what...
Well, the process has only been in place for a couple of years. So, yes, through 2009 through 2015. Jonathan, I believe that every roadway has been looked at in terms of the analysis, correct?
Correct. We've looked at every roadway in the analysis.
So the staff report represents that the prioritization of the East Side Parkway occurred in 2009. What has been drawn up here, and one of the considerations was that since 2009 and the East Side Parkway prioritization, Monterey Downs went away in December of 2016, which is why Fred drew a different model for us to look at. We had a Parker Flats land swap that changed the density in that area out to Inner Garrison area. The university has changed its master plan to be more of a centralized, walkable university rather than the plan that had the sprawl that our traffic models were looking at when we prioritized the East Side Parkway. In 2009, the developments at Inter Garrison, Marina Heights, the dunes were all on stall. Nothing was happening. And now those are booming, and East Side, and Monterey Downs is gone, that perhaps we need to relook at and prioritize what roads need to happen right now. And Inner Garrison in 2009 was the multimodal corridor. That's changed. So I'm just was trying to figure out when we last looked at the criteria that prioritized the East Side Parkway.
Yes, Chair, if I might, if that's a question.
It is.
It is clear. A couple of the items you mentioned occurred way before the 2009-2010 timeframe, and we can bring all that info.
Probably did.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
We certainly, the board's authority is to prioritize every year, and so we bring this capital improvement program back to this board usually in May at the request of Supervisor Parker and other members of the board for a preview, and then action is taken either in June or in July. So all of that comes back to the board.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, are you going to open it up for other board members to ask a question?
Well, yes, that's my anticipation.
I am sorry, but if I didn't take it, then you wouldn't give me a second bite at the apple. So
You would have took it anyway. Mr. Santos.
If it please the board, I have some questions of Tansey's study. Apparently there was no direct line between Eucalyptus to Inter Garrison considered. Are the numbers based upon a guesstimate, or how were those derived? That would be question number one. You could hold your answer on that. The second question I have is, if there has been no specific routing proposed for East Side Parkway, and then how can you make projections? The third thing that I would note is, if you look at the calculations that you've set forward with and without East Side Parkway, there's a 260% increase in traffic through the CSUMB campus, which I can assure you doesn't sit well with us. I'll sit and take my answers. Thank you.
So let me repeat your first question. Does the East Side Parkway include a connection from Eucalyptus?
No, specifically what was said was we don't have any exact numbers on a direct connection between Eucalyptus and Inner Garrison Road, and yet that's what you use for your models. So I'm trying to understand, if you don't have any specific numbers, how did you arrive at those models?
Frederick, do you want to go through that again, please?
So the model does connect from General Jamur via Eucalyptus, and then we will have East Side Parkway start. That's how it is in the model right now, and it then goes, and there's also a connection to Giggling, and then it goes from there sort of all the way through to Schoonover, approximately, where it joins where East Garrison is on Inter Garrison.
Right,
so there is a model connection right now.
Right, so that would drive my second question, which was, I thought there wasn't a specific alignment for East Side Parkway.
It's connectivity that's established between those roads, right? And that connectivity is because that's how it is in the FORA plan and the Regional Transportation Plan. And I think it was also in the Seaside General Plan.
Well, yeah, and so the response I might have is, I thought the purpose was to facilitate east-west transiting through the county, as opposed to connecting Inner Garrison to Eucalyptus. And those are different things necessarily. One does not follow the other.
your question is actually bringing up quite a bit of policy decisions that have been made by the FORA board over the last decade plus time period on where the potential alignment of East Side Parkway would be. The model doesn't really care the actual alignment other than how the general location would be and where the trips would load going through there.
Okay, so I'm trying to follow the notion of the argument you made about straight lines being preferable, the use of existing roads, trying to unpack why since at this point we're not even talking about alignments, why you're presuming an alignment. Since the general conversation at this point is the goals and objectives, that seems to come before the proposition of an alignment.
The question wasn't whether we presume an alignment or not. The past FORA board policy was that there would be an East Side Parkway type project as part of the capital improvement program for FORA. So it was included in the modeling as a project. The reason for our presentation was to show what results the model had, reflecting what types of trips were taken on East Side Parkway and what impact that had on regional travel.
Got it. So the last thing I will say, because I have a birthday party being thrown for me by my daughters for me, is that if you add up the number of trips with or without East Side Parkway and the effects on all the other roadways, the number of trips increased through CSUMB is more than every other roadway being considered combined, which might be an issue.
Mr. Hoffa.
Yeah, I have one question. Of the 63% of trips that are generated either on the former Fort Ord or going to the former Fort Ord, did the study differentiate how many of them were originating at CSUMB or concluding at CSUMB? And the reason I ask that is if a significant of the traffic is generated there or going there, I don't understand. It doesn't seem reasonable to me to have a plan that doesn't allow the traffic to go through it.
So the campus is identified in the traffic analysis zones as far as specific land area and the land uses. So while we didn't pull those numbers out because that wasn't in question for this presentation, the demand and the trips going to and from the campus itself could be pulled out of the model. So that's kind of just a new question.
Any other questions from the board for staff?
I did have a couple questions, but the one I wanted to focus on is I actually have a question about Inter-Garrison Road. So I appreciate that in the goals and objectives that the change has been made, the modifying, avoiding CSUMB to minimize impacts and to include other neighborhoods. But I wonder why the objective at the top of the second page also wasn't taken out, de-emphasize Inter-Garrison Road, because the Inter-Garrison Road is envisioned to be part of the 8th Street connector, and so it just seems that to be coherent, we have to keep it. It's going to be used. It's an important road that's going to connect the dunes to Inter-Garrison via Inter-Garrison, and probably be taken by university residents, which kind of gets to Alan Hoffa's question. So I don't think it's going to be possible to de-emphasize Inter-Garrison as a road because it's just so important to the east-west traffic. So the question just is why was de-emphasized Inter-Garrison Road left in instead of shifting the emphasis somehow there?
So the reason for leaving that objective in, we received a comment letter from CSUMB asking us not to bisect their campus, so that Inter-Garrison Road section from their main campus to their East Campus housing, that would affect bisecting their campus with regional traffic. And also it's in the base reuse plan, the phrasing de-emphasize Inter-Garrison Road for regional traffic. So the base reuse plan talks about allowing more pedestrian bicycle use on that road.
So you're saying basically that the traffic that's coming from the dunes on the 8th Street connector and going on to Inter-Garrison isn't considered regional through traffic, it's local forward traffic, and it's more likely to be pedestrian and bicycle and not cars?
I'll let Frederick talk about the network since he's the expert.
It could be. It could definitely be. So we have the intermodal connection that everybody's talking about. We have the FORA connection. So we're going to see, and if you look at the AMBAG and the RTP, there is definitely growth forecasted in multimodal activities that are not car-based. So bicycle trips, walking trips, and transit trips. Some of those are in the model. The model is not very sensitive to those. So if you're going to ask me to pull out the transit, I can't. That's sort of external to the model. But there are assumptions for accommodating those modes.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Alexander.
Thank you. Good, Chair. I've got a question about the mobility of first responders. You know, the Big Sur fire in Santa Rosa, firefighters are coming from all over the state and even out of state. Will a road such as the one we're talking about here help mobility to the fire roads that already exist, or to other roads that aren't as intertangled as the fire roads, which they'll need to get on? So I guess what I'm asking is, how does this increase mobility of firefighters, other rescue workers getting out into the back areas where the fire will most likely be in the dry areas?
So I think we should also distinguish, because you can have local calls and you can have more of the regional calls as well. So I think county would be a more regional call, and if it's in the seaside, city of Seaside, it's going to be local. The transportation roadway network acts as a function, as a system. Okay, and that's why you will see we have projects everywhere. It's not just specific locations, and those projects have been identified to help relieve congestion. Where number one, there could be some future development. Number two is looking at some regional growth. Okay, if the system gets busier, those response times are going to be longer. On a regional basis, any road that you add that can help relieve congestion and decrease the response times will be good. And of course, on the local system, it's going to be exactly the same.
Director Phillips.
Just a question for Tamsi. As I recall, we're doing a 218 study on the capacity to 218 and how we can alleviate some of the traffic or expand the capacity of that, correct?
We're looking at Highway 218 specifically for the city of Delray Oaks and Seaside. The emphasis of that study is how to improve bicycle and pedestrian connectivity through those neighborhoods, but vehicle flow is definitely part of that analysis.
So if General Jim Moore went and connected up with that
how 218 interacts with General Jim Moore is very much part of it.
Okay, if there's no more questions on...
I just wanted to have an opportunity to hear again in my head the correct way that these goals and objectives are going to be put to use. Where does this fall into the system that we're going to... My understanding is that we are at the very beginning of a process. This is one, and these are the goals and objectives I'm holding up. This is from the board at a policy level, a general directive to take into consideration. My understanding is that through the CEQA process, more definition will be created from a wide variety of inputs of assessment tools, goals, objectives, measures, data, and whatever, that then is put into place to recommend alternatives, not only on route, but on whether or not, and then firming up data about why. Is that correct?
I would say that's correct.
So this is not written in stone. This is the beginning of a process. We're giving it a good shot, and off it goes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Teacher, I had about 4 questions in the original comments that I made. They were based on the population estimates. If we're talking about a 25-year window, remember I mentioned 2048, like what happened there? If we're already partway through, if this is a 2010 projection for 25 years, that's why we're talking about 2035. then are we just looking at another 10 or 13% if the rate is consistent? Did the modeling consider where the population growth would be? Did the modeling consider where the job growth would be? And did the modeling consider buses for the 25,000 hospitality workers?
I'll answer that. So the way the forecasted growth of population, employment, and housing is distributed in the model is through the process that AMBEG does. It's tied into the state regional housing needs allocation. And typically with population and employment forecasts, the higher the level you do it, the more accurate it is. The more you break it down, the less accurate it is. But this also is a bottoms-up approach of being consistent with each city's general plan and where the city says growth is going to be. So what's happening is you have where the city says it's going to be, you have the numbers at the high level, and it gets pushed down to match up with the city's forecasts for growth and distributed into those traffic analysis zones. So that's the process, and that's why the various land uses are in housing units and things are put into the different traffic analysis zones. That has to match up in total into the numbers that AMBEG has for the region. The types of trips, such as future potential for an automated bus that platoons with 6 buses in a row, that's not in the model. That's not. We don't make predictions of future technology and the impacts on how that will change our travel because it's unknown. So the model is a conservative effort to make the best forecast of growth. And I guess the way to look at it is it generally reflects how we travel now. So changes in the future, it will happen in future model updates, but the way the model distributes traffic now reflects the way we travel now.
Increasing in job projection. Where were the jobs going to be? Did you put that into the model? It seems like right now they're mostly in in Monterey, right?
So the higher level forecast for job growth is both tied into statewide estimates of future employment, and it's also compared to our current job scenarios and what we have in jobs. And it's broken down by industry and by demand for industry at a fairly high level when you're looking at the 3-county AMBEG level and then into the Monterey County and then into jurisdictions. So different employment types are forecast to change differently over that 20-year period. And then the model distributes them based not just on where cities would like to have job growth, but also different economic sectors are attracted to each other. The model identifies where different types of employment have synergy. Those kind of things are part of the process of allocating jobs.
Thank you.
Okay. If we're done with questions, I'm going to go ahead and open it to the public. Seeing the amount of people that are here to comment and the time and the interest of keeping a quorum, we're going to restrict public comment to 2 minutes. If you have spoken before on this item, please restrict your comments to new comments and try to keep them to the agenda item at hand, which is the Parkway, Eastside Parkway goals and objectives. Thank you.
May I start? Okay, my name is Frank Pierce. I'm a member of the Air Board Advisory Committee, and one of the issues that I have not heard anything about is the impacts that traffic can have on our air quality. And if we can get the traffic to move steadily without stopping, even though there may be several ways of doing it, the key is, from the air point of view, we need to keep the traffic moving to decrease the amount of stuff that goes up in the air when you're stopped and stuck. The other thing that hasn't been discussed is the importance of being able to get from point A to point B within a reasonable time. Because when I had my office in Salinas and I live in Pacific Grove, a lot of times it would take me an hour to get between my office and Pacific Grove, but then at other times in the day it'd only take 25 minutes. And so I think those two things need to be considered with how you do your balance and your routing, air and time.
Thank you. Thank you.
My name is Fred Muir. I would ask, as you're considering the goals for this road, that you realize that you're really thinking about a much larger goal, I hope. And that goal is to address the greatest need we have in this region, and that is to make a dent in the affordable housing crisis that we are having for our workforce today and our workforce tomorrow. You guys have been subject to a very well-coordinated opposition movement to the bypass. Please, as you're considering these goals, don't forget the goals of the people that are living in their cars, multiple families living in one house that we all heard about in Seaside earlier this week, that are desperate for housing. Fort Ord is the only place you have sufficient land to build sufficient housing to make a dent. To build those houses, you must build those houses to get the jobs that everybody wants. To build those houses, not only do you have to have land, you have to have the infrastructure to support the houses. The transportation infrastructure is a critical piece of that. Fort Ord could have that infrastructure if you don't allow yourself to be taken down the rabbit holes of project, no project, or so on. Stay focused on the potential of Fort Ord to answer the biggest question we have in each of our communities, in each of our employer bases, and that's the ability to get houses for the people we need so desperately to stay here or that we want to bring here.
Thank you.
Good evening. It is evening, right? I think it's cocktail hour, but I'm sure he wants to get home. It is a beautiful day. My name is Pete Scudder. I'm the current chair of the Monterey County Business Council, and hearing this all the comments this afternoon. A form of this has been out for over 15 years, and it's been analyzed and analyzed and analyzed. And I think every day we get up, we drive down to Highway 1 and see the challenges that we're all up against. With the workforce trying to get to their job. The Monterey County Business Council represents about 100 members of the business community, which employed probably about 2,000 people. Myself, I'm an employer of about 80 people, and we do commute to Monterey every single day, and that impact. And most of my workers live in the Salinas area, so it does impact us. This community is growing, you like it or not. It is growing, and we have a real opportunity here. I think FORA has an opportunity. It's part of the charge, part of the mission you had to put this roadway through. The East Side Parkway is the right thing to do. Sure, we have to do some mitigation plans. We have to look at some things and kind of massage things around, but we've analyzed it for many, many years, and the congestion's getting worse and worse and worse. In fact, tonight on the way home, you'll probably see that as well. I live in Prunedale, so I'll probably be behind the golf tournament traffic going the other direction. But with that said, I think it's a good plan. I heard a comment a little earlier about how it impacts the taxpayers. Remember that the workforce is the taxpayers. It's just not the taxpayers that come out of the woodwork to take care of this. All the workforce here is the taxpayers, and it's critical to realize you are representing the taxpayers, the ones that have to get to work to do their jobs. And it does cost us all as consumers when we're bottlenecked in there. The prices go up, my prices have to go up, businesses have to get additional fees for those costs. So
thank you, Mr. Scudder. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Make the right decision. I think this Parkway is the right way to go. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Susan Schiavone. I'm a Seaside resident, and I'm not going to make any comments for or against, but I do want to point out the TAMC using these charts where there's no improvement or all improvements. When the no improvement model does not include any of the external capacity improvements, then you're painting an incorrect picture about the efficiency of building the Parkway. So you need a third model that includes all of the external improvements without the Parkway to compare three models in order to have an accurate analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kevin Dayton, Government Affairs Liaison for the Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. I'm here to speak in support of the goals and objectives that are listed here for this plan. I'll just make a couple of comments. This was a very difficult issue, I think, for the general public to understand. Very technical, lots of engineering and scientific things talking about models. The part of this presentation that I thought was the most effective was simply the photo at the very beginning of the TAMC, which showed the traffic backed up. Setting aside all of these issues, the point is that right now there are a lot of people traveling from east to west who spend a lot of time in traffic each day. We all see it, we all know it's a problem, and the question is, are you going to build another road to help to reduce that time, or are you just going to leave things the way they are, hoping it changes? And I know there are some people who say, you know, the problem is economic growth and job creation. But I actually, the Chamber believes that commercial activity is a positive thing for the community. Providing these jobs is good. And giving the people the opportunity of having multiple choices on how to get to work to reduce the time they spend commuting is a positive thing for the community. I encourage this board here to vote yes with the goals and objectives. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Tom Ward. I'm on the Board of Land Watch. TAMC recommended in its scoping comments for the reassessment report that FORA prepare a new transportation analysis. TAMC specifically noted the slower pace of development, presumably that the slower pace would no longer warrant the same level of circulation improvements. And certainly I think these population estimates are wildly optimistic. The point of the TAMC recommendation was that FORA should re-examine the need for the initially proposed roadways. Although there was a study of fee allocations in 2017, FORA has not, to Landwatch's knowledge, undertaken the study that TAMC actually recommended. The 2017 fee allocation study started with the premise that the East Side Parkway would be built, even though the fee allocation study considered an alternative SIP scenario. That scenario also assumed that the East Side Parkway would be built. It does not appear that FORA has considered an alternative. That's very clear from the presentations today. And they would simply, an alternative simply to improve the existing roads. In light of the possibility that this would be a sufficient and less costly alternative, FORA should prepare a new transportation analysis prior to adopting these goals and objectives for an option that might be unnecessary, that is the East Side Parkway. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Mike DeLappa with Landwatch. So I just want to try and summarize what we learned today. The first thing we learned was there was no FORA analysis. I think Tom pointed that out. No regional analysis by FORA, even though TAMC asked for it, of roads. So the goals presuppose an analysis. That hasn't ever taken place. Second, we heard this is not a regional priority. I want to address the people in Pacific Grove, Carmel, Monterey. This is not going to get workers to you quicker. Your workers are going to get stuck in the same places they are today. What you heard was they're stuck on the front end getting from Salinas to Blanco. They're stuck on the back end getting from Inner Garrison to any other road. It doesn't work. So yes, you can get people really quickly through the hole, but they're going to hit roadblocks on either side. You really need to step back and look at regionally, how do we move people more intelligently? If TAMC was not asked to come today, you would not have heard this. This project's been on the books for, what, 20 years? This is the first time TAMC is presented. I just find that unbelievable. So, you know, this is not how government is supposed to operate. You're supposed to get good data, analyze the data, and figure out how to solve public needs. And I would encourage you to go back and say, okay, given that we haven't done that, are these goals appropriate? I do not think the goals are appropriate. They're not going to help Monterey, Pacific Grove, Carmel, workers moving between those places. It's pretty clear. I urge you, be curious, ask questions. There's a lot of information that came out today that would warrant really close examination. If you adopt the goals today without asking those questions, you're not doing your job. Thank you.
Into the microphone. Okay. Hi, I'm Natalie Anicetti, and I'm a Seaside resident. I believe FORA can accomplish its goals by improving existing roadway infrastructure while preserving the rare oak woodlands of former Fort Ord. When I look at the maps of the proposed East Side Parkway, I see happy trails with a road drawn right through it. The locals who use this land call it happy trails. Happy Trails is the same land FORA is proposing for the development of the East Side Parkway. Carmel has Point Lobos, Pacific Grove has Asilomar, Monterey has Jack's Peak, Seaside and Marina share Happy Trails. Happy Trails is a biologically rare coastal oak woodland and wildlife habitat. The environment is a hybrid between the coastal dune landscape and the oak woodlands of the Salinas Valley. It is the most verdant and wooded land in all of former Fort Ord and was originally recommended for preservation. Happy Trails is used by residents of all the peninsula cities and beyond like a regional park for walking, hiking, road or mountain biking, and horseback riding. This parcel is Seaside's only wildland and provides direct access from the peninsula into the Fort Ord National Monument. There is a bit of recent history about this land that you should know. Happy Trails is the same land the residents of Seaside saved just over 1 year ago by successfully defeating the Monterey Downs project. That project left the city with debt. There was also a lawsuit against the city of Seaside, won by Landwatch and Keep Fort Ord Wild over this same property. The majority of Seaside residents did not want Monterey Downs and do not want this rare oak woodland developed. Mayor Rubio has been leading the charge for the city of Seaside to develop this land. The public does not have the desire to develop this land. You are all board members of a public agency. Please listen to the public you serve. FORA can accomplish its goals by improving existing roadway infrastructure and choosing to preserve Happy Trails, which is a rare coastal oak woodland. Thank you.
Good evening. Nancy Amadeo. I'm a council member from the city of Marina. I'm also an alternate on this board. So I received all of the letters that the board received. And I would note the letters were 95%, maybe more, were exactly the same letter produced by Landwatch and sent to the board. I found that somewhat disturbing that it didn't allow for other voices. It was Landwatch's voice, and then it's touted as, look at all the letters you received. Well, there are plenty of people who use our transportation system who are not going to take the time to write a letter. They're just not going to do it. And I'll tell you about one of them. She's my daughter. She lives in the Creek Bridge area near the corner of Constitution and Baranda Road. She used to commute from that location into Monterey at the Del Monte Mall. She did it for years. If she was commuting during normal commute hours, it took her an hour and 15 minutes. That's a long trip. Now she commutes to Oak Ridge in San Jose. It takes her an hour and 15 minutes. Do we really want our citizens who live in a far less populated area to suffer from those kinds of traffic impacts? I don't think we do. And I will tell you, I live right off the freeway. And if I need to get into Monterey in the morning for a doctor's appointment at, say, 8:30 in the morning, it will take me 45 minutes to an hour for a drive that during the day takes me 15 minutes. You need to think about that when you make your decision. You have the opportunity to decide what this route will look like, but the route is needed. Please move forward with this project.
Thank you.
Gary Curcio, Director of Government Affairs, Monterey County Hospitality Association. We represent 250 of our members who employ 25,000 hospitality employees. We are in favor of this project. As Mayor Edlin so aptly pointed out earlier, that's not why we're here today. This project is neither going to be approved or denied today. What I would like to see happen is that at least this board shows the responsibility to keep this moving in a responsible manner. And to do that, this group needs to, tonight, pass the approval of East Side Parkway goals and objectives for use in future preparation of environmental impact. If it doesn't happen tonight by unanimous vote, we're going to be back here in another month and we're going to start this all over again. Let's keep it moving. I want to make one final comment. I spoke at the study session in December, in the evening session. There were several speakers that night that are against this project that were saying we do not need to build any more roads so we can bring more tourists and visitors into this peninsula. Here's the problem with that kind of thinking. What we are trying to overcome today with this group is has absolutely not a single thing to do with a visitor or a tourist. This is about us. This is about the residents, the workers. We are inconveniencing ourselves. We are sitting in these cars for 50, 45 minutes when it should be 15 minutes. So let's at least understand what this problem is about. This particular issue has absolutely not a thing to do with the tourism industry and the visitors on this peninsula and in this county. This is about us. I would urge this board to pass this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. George Riley. I'm just confused how this FORA board operates. You made a policy decision in the 90s for this parkway. You had an updated priority put on this parkway in 2010. You're operating on a prior decision based on old thinking, based on a different membership, based on a concept that Fort Ord was going to be developed a certain way. Now we know more. It's not being developed the way it was planned in the 90s, nor in 2010. The growth has been in the north part of the area and not on the peninsula. So you've got, it's already been admitted today. CSUMB, Marina, and Seaside are where the growth and development is taking place. Your own economic development plans have not delivered on what surrounded the justification for this parkway years and years and years ago. And since 2010, you've had a monument established. You've had a lot of the lands opened up. There's a lot of public using those lands. You've got a new population base that knows what's out there, appreciates what's out there, and they don't want to lose it. And just because somebody maybe copy a bunch of emails, that's an expression of the public, whether you like it or not, and whether it seems similar or not. The part I don't understand is you're planning for the future, not for the past. At least that should be your job. At least in my opinion, you would be looking toward the future. And the more you put a parkway right in the middle of what is a treasured resource that's more and more be developed and used by the youth, and used by the young people, and used by the future, and used by the CSUMB students. The young people are saying different things than what the old people are. And I'm saying this category of people, us, old people, need to pay more attention to what the new trends are.
Thank you, Mr. Riley.
Thank you.
Michael Salerno, Keep Fort Ord Wild. Good evening, board. I direct your attention to Exhibit A, since we're getting into approving these goals. Supervisor Parker touched on it for a moment, and it's the goal of de-emphasizing Inter-Garrison Road as a major vehicular route. We object to this goal and would ask that it be removed. De-emphasizing Inter-Garrison should not be a goal because, first of all, CEQA doesn't allow for it. You can't pre-eliminate a feasible alternative. It's really obvious that Inter-Garrison is a feasible alternative. Additionally, in November of 2016, this board approved an RFP with the consultant team to quote, to draft conceptual alternative descriptions. One of those was, I'm reading from it, Eastside Parkway alignment along 7th and 8th Street and Inter-Garrison Road. So if you adopt this goal today, you're abandoning what the board approved in 2016. Additionally, and this is reading from the base reuse plan EIR, it identified Inter-Garrison Road as a major east-west facility for former Fort Ord that could be used to relieve congestion from the Blanco Road engine corridor. This is from the reuse plan EIR. Finally, I'd like to comment, there's a large amount of deference to no traffic, or we don't want traffic moving through CSUMB. That's not a reasonable goal. If you recall, we were going to put Whispering Oaks there in a business park. Every bus MST owned was going to go up and down Inter-Garrison Road at one point. All the traffic from the business park. So what changed? So let's look at that. Inter-Garrison Road is a feasible alternative that needs to be considered. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Robert Frischmuth. My career was in the energy sector, but for the last 19 years, I have been a volunteer for the environment. There are valid environmental reasons why the East Side project should be rejected, but I want to focus on some purely financial arguments. The proposed East Side Parkway doesn't seem to me to be cost-effective way to meet our future transportation needs. The money allocated for this project may likely be better spent improving existing roads. I would like to add the following objective, if a person can add an objective to your objective list. And that is, how can $18 million be most effectively spent to relieve future traffic congestion? Because the proposed East Side Parkway is so expensive, I have another concern. In preparation for FORA's forthcoming shutdown, FORA should be very frugal with its money. As FORA sunsets, your local jurisdictions will assume any of FORA's liabilities which are not offset by assets. In this regard, I think the board should be exploring alternatives that benefit local jurisdictions.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Diane Cotton. Today we've heard about the beginnings of the FORA transition plan while also considering a commitment to a project which will take years beyond FORA's tenure to complete. Doesn't make sense to me. I would like to see a transition plan that considers, I'm losing my place.
And we're on the
that concerns what was forward, that would turn it over to the entities that are going in to own it.
Ma'am,
and
the
that would
subject matter
use
is the goals and objectives of the East Side Parkway, not the transition plan.
And I would like to see TAMSI to be able to be considered as an entity for transportation and to take over the East Side Parkway. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Jane Haynes. I want to speak to the process today. I wish I had some of the same questions Landwatch did. So I looked up my answers myself. I found out that the 1997 base reuse plan states on page 111 in volume 1, the East Side Parkway will serve as a new interchange with a proposed state Highway 68 freeway. There is no proposed freeway. It says the East Side Road would run between Imgen and Gingling. That's on page 297 of volume 2. Well, that's not what the fee allocation studies looked at. It says, you all know the dwelling units are about 4 times the actual number of dwelling units. That's what it predicted. And I also looked in the EIR. I specialized in CEQA for 20 years. And I cannot find any required mitigation in there. There's no CEQA required mitigation in there. It's the word mitigation is used, like I would say, I have a stomachache, so the mitigation is Alka-Seltzer. But it is not used in the sense of a CEQA mitigation that I can find. Finally, there's the whole business of not allowing the public to, or not allowing a choice on this. It's either you have the East Side Parkway and you have a choice. You can put it here, you can put it there, you can put it there. But it's not a yes or no thing. So I urge you to vote no on the goals and objectives, and to put in your motion that you want a regional study done with TAMSI to find out if, in fact, this really is the best way to solve the transportation problems.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jason Campbell. To follow up on that a little bit more, every time I hear that the East Side Parkway is in the base reuse plan, and then I hear it described as a road from Injun to Giggling. I'm just astounded. That's like a total disconnect. There's the road you are discussing today is not the road that was in the base reuse plan. So please recognize that. I have a couple of questions. As far as those, and it kind of was the false choice given with the studies, if East Side Parkway is built versus if it's not built. I did not see any study that showed what if improvements were made to these other adjoining roads. That would be a very interesting comparison. And that gets to my second question is, we have very complicated formulas that tell us how much traffic is moved if we do this or build this road or whatever situation. But how about a little program that puts out the most efficient bang for the buck? How much traffic can we move per dollar? I don't know why we're going to spend, I mean, part of the responsibility here is financial. Why would we spend all this money to move a few cars when we can spend far less and move nearly as many? We don't know that, so I'd love to see a model that answers that question, the return on investment as far as moving cars. I read many letters as well as an alternate, and I actually read them. Some of them were very similar, reiterating Landwatch's points, which were very good points, but a lot of those were also had additions and people's personal thoughts on them. So it wasn't just simply a copy and paste. I've seen a lot of that too. But the point being that the letters were overwhelmingly
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
Opposed to that.
Hopefully I'm the last person. My name is Jack Stewart, and I'm a resident of Marina. And I'm not talking into this mic yet. I'm sorry. Anyway, I have long been involved with the Veterans Cemetery. I see on the report here, one of the annexes of the report here, that they do discuss the cemetery. Now, without the East Side Parkway, there's no way to intersect and get to the cemetery except through the military housing at Fort Ord and or Presidio Monterey Annex, it's known that by now. And it's very difficult to get there from the greater Salinas area without going back roads. It's not really nice for the funeral processions to go that way. And from the South County, it's nigh impossible. Not impossible. It takes a while to get there, that's all. But one thing we have to do, we have to remember, we resolved all the issues on the recreational use of Fort Ord. We have yet to resolve the economic recovery developments. Not even close. We must have roadways to accommodate industry coming in, whether it be small business or large business. One of the things you look for, and I learned this as a county employee, as department head for Military and Veterans Affairs, the first thing you have to consider, access to the public. And that means transportation access, public access. We've got to have roads in and out.
Thank you.
Accommodate that. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Denise Fishbot, and I am a resident of Pacific Grove. Today we have not heard anything about alternative to the East Side Parkway. It is that, or where do you place it, and so on, as it was mentioned by other speakers. Now, there's something that troubles me in the goals and objectives document that you have. It says that the East Side Parkway effect on the oak forest would be minimal. Well, I think that minimal impact, even minimal impact on the oak forest is unacceptable, because what does it mean? It means it still means that there will be wildlife corridors that are going to be interrupted. There's going to be habitat loss, and there's going to be emissions released from the destruction of thousands of carbon storing trees. And it will be, more land is going to be paved over. And once it is paved over, it's over. So I am asking you, what is a legacy that you want to leave behind yourself for the children and the grandchildren? I'm asking you to vote no for the goals and objectives as they are. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no further public comment, I bring it back to the board. I didn't have any comments or anything before, but I'd like to say a few things now before we move into the next phase of this. I heard mention of Monterey, PG, and Carmel, but I didn't hear mention of Salinas, Seaside, and Marina, who are very impacted by the circulation of workers. Also, did agree with one comment that this thing would be blocked at both ends. And that's true, but that's TAMC's job, is to unblock those both ends. And I got to tell you, I sit on TAMC, and I'm not real confident that TAMC's going to do that job. There's no money in the funds for Highway 1 congestion relief. We got a bus maybe, but that's it. When we talked about Monterey Road and Fremont, no plans for that. There's a interchange, Monterey Road interchange, but that hasn't even gotten enough money for a study. So I'm not real enthused about TAMC's effort in that regard. I know that the Davis Road was considered numerous times for improvement, and that went by the wayside as well. So we want, the public seems to want TAMC to take this over, but I'm not sure that those priorities at TAMC align with what's necessary here at FORA. It'll probably end up going to TAMC, but we here at FORA need to make sure that those priorities that we have established here need to be addressed for this base reuse plan. Because I'm in Seaside, and we have an economic development plan. We are going to bring jobs. We are going to bring housing, and we need a way to move these people. And the folks coming from Salinas need an alternative. It may not be the best alternative. The best alternative would be to widen Highway 1 and make it travelable, but they're not going to do that. So we got to provide alternatives for everybody that wants to get here or wants to leave here. It's not all one way. People live here on the peninsula, actually work in the valley as well. So I'm really a little frustrated. I don't know if that comes through in the way I'm talking, but I'm hoping that the board will see their way to move these goals and objectives so that we can get to the alternatives phase, so we can talk about all these alternatives to the Parkway, so we can understand what they are. We can do the analysis. We can have the data. And I'm a little upset with some of the analysis by the traffic counts. I mean, they said, well, we're going to go down Eucalyptus and turn right and go down to Giggling and do this and do that. No, that's not the preferred route. It's down General Jim Moore to 218 to a direct connect to Highway 1. Why would anybody in their right mind take the worst way? So the presentation, I think, lacked some real-time scenarios in there. So I'm just a little upset with that, and that it seemed like someone was trying to skew the numbers or skew the understanding of that. So anyways, I'll take comments and questions or whatever. Yes, Director.
Chair, as has been discussed in the past couple of hours, we're at the very first phase of this right now. We'll be going through an environmental impact report analysis under CEQA All we're asking right now is to approve the East Side Parkway goals and objectives, as vague as they can possibly be. I'd like to move that we do approve those goals and objectives.
I'll second.
Second. Motion and a second. On the second, is there any discussion? Mayor Gunter.
Well, I've heard comments that our goals and objectives are about jobs in Salinas. I've heard about water. I've heard that the plan in 1993 was to not have a road. I understand the people in Marina do not want the people from Salinas coming through their portion of Fort Ord. I've heard how but it is about jobs. It's about getting the people that are driving from Salinas to Monterey to work at this fine golf tournament they're having this weekend, or to come to Marina to work in your hotels. We are the only city that's going to be building affordable housing. Most of my people can't afford to live in Marina. I know they can't afford to live in Monterey. And I think if we don't take a stand and we move these objectives forward soon, you're right. FORA will go away, and maybe it won't. Who knows? TAMSI has many things on their plate today. They have so many plans on that they're going to have to hire 50 more staff, so maybe they can hire everybody that works at FORA to finish accomplishing what they've got to do with the measures that we've all passed, that we all supported. But I grew up as a kid and I raised holy hell at Fort Ord. My dad was in the Army. I've been all over this base. And I appreciate the fact there's trees here and the environment's here. But as a city that has the most solar, that has the most LED lights, that's doing the most to conserve water, when I hear people talk about the environment, it would sure be nice to see some of that over here. I move that we pass this and we move on to the next phase.
Mr. Hoppe.
So I can't support the motion. I believe we've been set up essentially with what's called a false choice, either this or that. And I think there are lots of other alternatives that have partly been prohibited from consideration because of CSUMB's policy. So there's Second Avenue to Light Fighter to General Gym. There's 8th Avenue to Inner Garrison. And so there are other alternatives that are going to be precluded if we go forward. And in particular, the Inner Garrison aspect is explicitly prohibited, which I suspect is going to get us sued again because it's essentially limiting the alternatives. So I think, unfortunately, for me to support it, we'd have to remove that. We'd also, that particular objective. And then the goal talks about mitigating traffic congestion on Highway 1. We didn't see any evidence of that tonight. I don't believe there is any likelihood of that. The East Side Parkway is primarily, as conceived, primarily is about east-west traffic, not north-south. Second Avenue was originally conceived as a north-south, alternative. So for me, I thought we heard some really good suggestions. I would like to see a joint FORA TAMSI study that examines a variety of ways to most efficiently improve our regional transportation. So I can't support the motion, I'm sorry.
Mr. Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to support the motion, and I believe that Mayor Edelin said earlier, prior to the presentation, that the motion is based on studying and making improvements to the goals and objectives. And if you look at, and I'm assuming it's based on what we have right here, that the project in mind is not even mentioned here. It's just it's making improvements to reduce traffic along several different corridors while maintaining cultural natural resources consistent with the reuse plan, and so on. And so I'm assuming that we're just going to move forward with the goals and objectives, knowing that we have to reduce traffic, which by itself, as someone mentioned earlier, is bad for the air and therefore trees around it. We have to try to suck that up. But I want to add one more thing to it. A portion of this, a good reason for all of this, is again housing and jobs. And I'm going to throw a personal thing into this, that I'm a teacher at Seaside High School. I've been the advisor of the National Honor Society for the last 20 years, which is our best students with the highest GPAs. They go away to college someplace else, and they don't come back here because there are no career-oriented jobs. I mean, unless they're going to be in management in a hotel or restaurant, there is not a whole lot else.
Routes that improve flow across the entire region. We talked about the bottlenecks. But if you look at this first bullet point, It says provide a primary northeast corridor through Fort Ord while maintaining an acceptable level of service throughout the FORA CIP. And if we add and regional roadway network, that I think should help address one of those things where that's an evaluation of a route so that it does not bottleneck. And I would suggest that as an addition. The second one I'm going to ask for some help in wordsmithing is that we're all hearing that we want to make sure we evaluate using the existing roads to achieve the same goals. And so if you look, and then there's going to be a third one, is if you look at the second to the last one, utilize the existing roadways as the foundation for the future network, that's close to saying that. It's that I would like to add the word in between utilize and the as and fully evaluate. So I would like to say that one of our goals is to utilize and fully evaluate the existing roadworks as the foundation for the future network. So I think that adds to that particular concern. And going back to the third issue on de-emphasizing Inter-Garrison Road as a major vehicular roadway, I think that I don't want to parse what major means. I'd like to see that it seems to me that the intent of this particular item is to really make sure we've got a great pedestrian and bicycle concentration where we need it. And so I think that needs to be reworked to not say we're de-emphasizing it as a major vehicular road, to say we are emphasizing it as a safe conduit for all pedestrian and bicycle traffic. And so those are the three things I think address the things we've heard repeatedly that get these goals and objectives to not just mention them, but to really focus on them. And I'd like to propose that as, I don't know what technically I should do, but friendly amendment.
Will the maker of the motion accept those edits?
I will accept the three items.
Thank you.
The seconder. Okay. Director Phillips.
Well, I tend to agree with you. I found the TAMSI presentation lacking, frankly, and I, as chairman of TAMSI, and I wish Debbie was here so I could tell her that. But and I like Todd, and he does a great job, but I just found it lacking. I know this property. I spent 5 months doing nothing but driving a truck around this property in 1965. So you know Fort Ord pretty well. All he did was that and play basketball on the brigade basketball team. But to me, you take a piece of property that was designed to keep everybody out, and then you open it up and you say, we want to have some housing for our workforce here, and we want to open up for things, and you not put some investment into road infrastructure. It just makes no sense. I mean, and we got to look at what's the right alignment. How do we do it? How do we do it in a way that we're not just decimating the university? But I think we'd be irresponsible not to. So I will support the motion.
Dr. Trively.
Yeah, MPC's plans to develop infrastructure and education and training for first responders absolutely requires access to and from those lands. Those lands are interior in the Fort Ord. So in addition to moving people across and around and all of the other worthy things that this body and members of the public has discussed, in addition to the very important environmental concerns, I urge you to support these goals and objectives because it's the only viable plan I see in terms of getting students, faculty, staff, first responders from around the region. These two training facilities will serve not just educational programs at MPC, but they'll be open to regional first responders for very important training. In the case of an interior fire on Fort Ord, if we're in there, we need some way to get these folks out, whether it's this East Side Parkway or some other means. So we're at the point of supporting goals and objectives, so I urge you to support access to the interior in an environmentally friendly and sound way. Thank you.
Ms. Morton.
I'd like to make a substitute motion and then speak to it if there's a second. So my motion is that we not take action to adopt these goals and objectives today and direct staff to return in March with a discussion and possible action by this board to revise the priority list of the CIP.
Second that. I have that same motion written. Good for you.
Okay, all right. So here's my thinking. So I think Tamsi's presentation gave us scenarios with full build out over the entire county, including Fort Ord. One of the things we know is that the numbers that we see in jurisdictions' general plans often do not happen on the schedule that they hope that they will. And this has been true on FORA year after year after year. We also have, a stock market thing going on, and they're talking about increased, mortgage rates, which could grind our current housing boom to a halt, or at least seriously slow it down. I've previously stated my belief that FORA's money is better spent on other roads at this point in time. We don't have the development in the Fort Ord section of Seaside that would justify this project at this time. And it will not solve the pre-existing commuter problem between Salinas and the peninsula as much as we all would like it to. This is not the silver bullet for that, as Mayor Rubio rightly pointed out. We do have development in East Garrison and in Marina that require the corresponding road improvements, such as the 8th Street extension, Davis Road, and Reservation Road. We have an obligation to provide TAMSI with money, about $35 million, I think it is, for regional projects, including those which would truly serve the regional traffic and transportation needs. And we haven't paid a penny, and we have it on paper, but we don't have that money anywhere for those projects. So I think we need to reorder our priorities. And while we're reordering our priorities on the CIP, I think we need to look seriously at the CIP cash on hand to possibly create inducements for the dunes and possibly other developers for building removal, because that would facilitate the kind of elimination of blight that the public has been calling for repeatedly, as have we for years. We shouldn't be telling the dunes that all they get to in order to bring those buildings down is a land sale credit. They need some cash to make that happen. And every month we continue this dispute with them is another month that prospective businesses or CSUMB students drive down 2nd Avenue and think, what are all these ugly buildings doing here? It looks dangerous. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't look good. I don't want anything to do with this place. So I think that we have better uses for our money, and we shouldn't throw it away doing an environmental impact report on a project that we don't need at this point in time. And the prospects of construction are iffy. So thank you.
Yes, so I would echo what Director Parker has just indicated. And we have limited resource. The studies have not been done to look at it. I agree with Director Hoffa, who said we're being asked today yes or no. And we're really not stepping back and looking at how do we address the traffic. We prioritized this project in 2009 and never reassessed if it really did anything for us now in 2018. We've just kept, as a board, reaffirming what a previous board makeup decided in 2009. And I've already listed, as have many speakers, as have other directors, the changes that have occurred here on the former Fort Ord and the surrounding areas. We have limited resources. We have limited time. Bringing it back in that CIP and the unbundling, some of the money is land sale revenues that go into this project. It's taxes. Those funds, it's grants. Those funds can go into blight removal. Blight removal gets the development going. When you have that development, you're going to generate the money that you need for further CIP projects. And if you need the East Side Parkway in 2035, you're faster to accumulate the monies from the development if you prioritize correctly. I support the motion to look at our priorities, achieve the best outcomes for alleviating traffic going forward, and our other obligations. Thank you for making the motion.
Is there any other comments?
Thank you, Chair. The original motion was to simply adopt goals and objectives to, including making improvements on the former Fort Ord to reduce traffic congestion. I don't know what more to say. That was the original goal, and I'll still stand by that. There may be alternatives to that, but we're adopting goals and objectives of reducing traffic congestion, basically.
Okay, well let's vote on the substitute motion. All those in favor? A roll call. Okay. Roll call vote on the substitute motion.
Director Parker? Director Phillips? Director Adams?
Yes.
Director Edelin?
No.
Director O'Connell? Yes. Director Morton?
Yes.
Director Hoffa?
Yes.
Director Rubio?
No.
Director Alexander? Director Carbone? Director Gunter?
No.
Director Garfield? Director Dallas? 5 yeses. Motion fails.
Motion fails. Okay. So let's vote on the original motion. Roll call vote, please.
Point of order. Could you just clarify what the amendments that were approved by Director Garfield were, for the record? Thank you.
In order to address the concerns about systemic flow, I suggest in the first bullet item that the clause starting while maintaining an acceptable level of service throughout the FORA CIP to add the words and regional roadway network. That'd be the first one. The second one is actually at the end, the second to the end item. Instead of saying utilize the existing roadways, it says to fully evaluate, this is what it should say, is fully evaluate the utilization of existing roadways as the foundation for the future network. So fully evaluate. And then the third one is on the second page, second item down below. It's about the Inner Garrison Road. And anybody who can help with wordsmithing, I'd be happy to hear that. But this is what I'm going to suggest is thank you. Let me try this one. Recognize Inter-Garrison Road as a vehicular route while providing the greater accommodation of pedestrian and bicycle traffic.
Does that meet you? Yep. Okay, there we go. All right, roll call vote, please.
Director Parker? No. Director Phillips?
Yes.
Director Adams?
No.
Director Edelin?
Yes.
Director O'Connell?
No.
Director Morton?
No.
Director Hoffa?
No.
Director Rubio?
Yes.
Director Alexander? Director Carbone?
Yes.
Director Gunter?
Yes.
Director Garfield?
Yes.
Director Dallas?
Okay, so the motion carries, but we need to bring it back for the next meeting for a second vote. Now, before we can move on to any other business, we need a motion to continue or a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
You too.
Second.
I'll take that as a second.
Lightning does strike
All those in favor?
I
Opposed?
think it would be. We had consultants sitting here for that last item. I think we should appreciate their coming all the way from San Francisco.